is a shocking experience for any soldier in any war. In Korea, this shock was made sharper because no one knew quite what to expect, except possibly the worst. Starvation and brutality, maybe, or torture even. Oriental torture, such as burning bamboo splinters under the fingernails. Then there'd been talk of brainwashing. Wasn't brainwashing a big thing with the Chinese? Maybe they even used narcotics.
Gentlemen, we welcome you to the ranks of the People's Democracy. We are happy to have liberated you from the Wall Street warmongers who sent you here for their profit. We have nothing against you, and we want to offer you a fair proposition. All we ask is cooperation and fair play. For you, this war is over, so don't fight us. Sit back, be like others, relax. Make yourselves comfortable like the other men are doing. You have nothing to fear. We want to be your friends. There are no slave camps here, no road gangs. You will not be put to work. We will give you free the best food and shelter and clothing we possibly can. Now, it won't be good by your standards. We are a poor country, but it will be the best thing we've got, and you won't have to work for it. Finally, we will give you the thing we know you really want most, a chance to learn the truth. When the warmongers have made enough money, when they let this senseless slaughter end, we just want you to go home to your own good homes and find families and simply tell them the truth, as you yourselves decide the truth to be.
Well, you've got to admit, this beats burning bamboo splinters under your fingernails. It was almost as irresistible as the deals you hear over the radio. Get it now. Don't deny yourself a thing. Sit back. No need to work. Get yours. Everybody else is getting theirs. Yes, this was pretty much the way in which our men were greeted by the Chinese and how their captivity began. In other wars, Americans have always organized together fairly soon after capture. They set up internal controls, escape committees, a military justice system, and groups to care for the sick and wounded. But in Korea, even though many months went by, effective internal organizations didn't develop. Yet during this period, there was no special indoctrination, no magical methods for the control of Americans, nothing except the usual hardships and deprivations of prison camp. And from Dr. Mayer's own standpoint, as a physician and psychiatrist, it was this period which disturbed him the most. Because it was during this period when most of the men who died. Give-up-itis, they called it, when the weakest simply turned their faces to the wall, covered their heads, and within 48 hours, were dead. If only the boy's family and school and church had helped him grasp and develop the idea of personal responsibility and obligation, had weaned him away from the belief that individual effort was painful and useless. If only he had been taught that he has the ability, even alone, to meet and solve serious problems, then this cold, terrible reality would not have destroyed him. But it was after the first few months that we began to see the communist Chinese indoctrination. The application by the Chinese of a finely developed educational program, one that occupied every day, all day, 7 days a week for the great majority of prisoners. It was a classical anti-capitalist, anti-American diatribe of the sort the communists have been publishing for years. Afterward, there were discussions in which every prisoner was forced to participate, but not by the Chinese. Oh, no.
Come on, soldier, get with it. Sum up this lecture for our instructor so we can get some chow.
Then there were the public confessions, where each prisoner was required to stand up and perform an exercise of public self-criticism, confessing to one and all his past sins against society.
Oh, we had several slaves, about 2,000 per acre. Beyond that, we owned most of the land. We drove Cadillacs all over, and there was a yacht for everybody. One for me, one for my daddy, and money was nothing to us.
Not because they believed what they heard or what they said. Nothing of the kind. They simply went along. They did what others expected them to do, even though they knew it was wrong. Why?
There were some things I wasn't too proud of. I haven't mentioned before. Like the time I took your food rations when you were sick. Or the time when I took medicine from you. And I also informed on some guys who were breaking out of Compound 14.
Well, everyone else was doing it. And to be popular, you went along too. If you didn't, well, a guy could become mighty unpopular.
All right, gentlemen, dismissed.
You had a free choice, of course. You could enjoy either popularity or respect.
Rotten crumb.
Not very many chose respect. Only a few.
All right. Well, welcome to Movie Night Extravaganza. I'm here with my co-host, John Ross, and of course, Jay Underworld. We'll be joined by J.G. Michaels later from Parallax View, which is a great podcast. Tonight, we're going to be talking about The Manchurian Candidate, which, was not the movie we just watched. The movie we just watched was like a Reagan narrated pseudo documentary that I definitely want to get you guys' thoughts on. But, it kind of follows along with the same theme, definitely.
I love that Ryan Grimm is in one of the soldiers that came in. I guess that's how he got a scar. Was at the re-education camp to make him a good leftist.
I think you can see like the shadow of the foreshadowing of the just say no Nancy Reagan propaganda clips, because he's like, I don't know, it's kind of funny that he's just thinks that peer pressure turns you into a communist and lack of personal responsibility, which of course this is when ostensibly Ronald Reagan is still a liberal, like a New Deal.
Right. Yeah, he was a New Deal Democrat.
Yeah. And then, of course, it's the black person that died and the who didn't have any personal responsibility. So, that's what killed him.
Yeah. I don't know. That it gets more and more outlandish, but it's 27 minutes. So obviously, we're not going to watch the whole thing. But Reagan's a ridiculous person. I just want to say that, first of all. The fact that he have you read Invisible Bridge or Reagan Land yet? Yeah, both.
Okay, you have. Okay. No, I haven't. So I was just wondering.
I've heard of Reagan Land, but I've not read it. So
it's it's a commitment.
Yeah, it's a big commitment.
Nixon Land is fantastic. So I imagine each of the books are equally as fantastic. I just I haven't had a chance to read them yet. So
Invisible Bridge is the only one that I was kind of that's the first one I read, and it was on Scribd, and that was the only Rick Perlstein book they had, and obviously it was when I just started working doing producing for GTA, and Ben kept bringing up Nixon Land, so I ended up just being you know what, I'm gonna try to delve into some of this. And I don't know, Invisible Bridge is really, it's mostly about Watergate, which I wasn't as interested in, I guess, because I already knew a lot about it, but I don't know.
Everybody knew the story of Watergate, so it wasn't really worth telling again.
Yeah. Well, it went in depth, and the interesting thing that Rick Perlstein always does is that he uses culture and uses what's going on in in establishment news and what's going on in the culture with movies and TV shows. And in Invisible Bridge, he starts quoting Saturday Night Live a lot, as kind of a bellwether for where American public thought is, which is interesting. But you kind of knew where it was with Watergate, but the combination of Watergate and Vietnam syndrome kind of were two of the things that really led to Reagan in the end, because it's this we're seeing as both the government now has lost total faith, we've all lost total faith in the government's lost total faith in itself, and for really the first time since the early 20th century consensus was established. And so it's kind of an emotional journey, which is interesting. But I think I was way more interested in Reagan Land, and I don't know, he really did a good job explaining how a weird of an elven creature Jimmy Carter was.
The one thing about Nixon Land, because that's the one that I've read, is even though like you know how it ends, like he creates great tension in the book. So you know, like he kept like ratcheting it up as you're getting closer and closer to the end of the book, and you're just like, wait, what's going to happen next? I mean, I know what happens next, but what's going to happen next? And I kind of hope that the rest of the books have that kind of tension in it as well.
Well, he was on Know Your Enemy, talking about like when Reagan first came out, and he said that like one of his techniques is like he wants to tell you a story, like, you know, it's all historical fact. He wants to like tell you a story about, you know, something, and he wants to like almost make it feel like you're not going to know what's going to happen in the end, despite the fact that everybody knows what happens in the end, which is an interesting like storyteller trait for a historian.
Yeah, no, that's good. I was talking on Ben Burgess's stream for a Patreon special. We watched a documentary, and I was talking about how documentary is one part kayfabe. You know, it's telling a story, and even if you're telling an honest story, there's still elements of dishonesty to create atmosphere to tell that story. Because I actually have a speaking role in a documentary that's coming out, or at least I did the previous cut. They went back into production, filmed some more stuff. I don't know if I'm still in it or not, but my buddy called me up and had me do he's like, can you do a German accent? And I'm like, yeah. He's like, okay, this is what I need. And so I actually went into a recording studio, went into the booth, and recorded a couple lines for a voicemail. With a German accent, and he's, you know, my friend's like, oh, this is fantastic. so I'm going to be in a movie with like Shepard Fairey and Xander Berkeley and like the most specialist of Pablo Picasso in the country. So nice. It's very exciting, and I get to be a German art director or art gallery owner.
Well, it's interesting, right? Because, you know, I mean, in a lot of cases, there's like a lot of archive stuff. Like I did those. I mean, you know, I did the illicit histories. Like I did a lot of the editing on those for Michael, and then I kind of did the same thing. We did those two Jacobin documentaries, like our Jacobin docs or whatever. And you know, there's more archive footage out there for things than you think there is, and more like photos than you think there is. But at the same time, like if you have the budget for it, like why not just recreate that? And why not like recreate things you don't have assets for? So, but then of course that pushes you further and further into that kayfabe idea, because you know when it's like what we just watched is pure kayfabe. Like there's no factual anything in it, despite the fact that it's narrated by an ex-president.
Ronald Reagan is real.
Yeah. See, I don't even know if he is at this point. You know what do we know? No, but like no. But
Ronald Reagan was a bad.
Well, he was a B-movie actor, of course, at this point. So narration was his was his thing,
and didn't really have any scruples. Yeah. But I always thought it was funny. Like he's a failed actor. You know what I mean? I feel like
B movie means failed.
No, but after the B movie, like he got pushed out of even B movies at one point. He got pushed to television, which at the time was he
was like I think he was like president of GE, of a Actors Guild.
It was
in the 50s.
First he was the Screen Actors Guild president.
Yeah.
And during that, basically informed to the House Un-American Activities Committee more than once, and was like happy to do it. And then after
he was actually doing it before that started.
Yeah.
He was doing it like back during the Second World War, and actually no, before the Second World War. And there is a painter, and I am completely blanking on his name. I'll have to dig it up later. But because you're editing this, right? Yeah, we can edit in the painting. But there's a painter where it's like from
Isn't
like
it nice to be on something you don't have to edit, by the way.
Yes. But there's this painting from like the 1930s, and it's like Reagan standing in an alley, like holding up a bunch of corpses of dead babies. And the whole thing is about how he, how he was like terrorizing Hollywood and was just a monster. So like you know, this goes way further back than you think. I don't know if that's actually in the in the Pearlstein books, but it's fascinating because it's
so in the Pearlstein books,
he was for socialized medicine at one point. Let's not forget about that.
In the Pearlstein books, it kind of goes through the when he's president of the Screen Actors Guild, and he's kind of testifying before the House Un-American Activities Committee, and kind of lobbies really hard for that, realizing that like his future in film is kind of dried up. Like he was always, because he goes from, he's always like the second, he's never the lead, he's always the second lead, and then he's kind of in a lot of like ridiculous B movies, and then as time goes on, like even the B movie directors are like, all right, like this is kind of a has-been guy. So he realizes that like the only thing he can really do at that point is like become the president of the Screen Actors Guild, and that gives him like an inordinate amount of power. To like negotiate contracts. And then of course slowly over time he becomes like the far right version of Reagan, because first General Electric kind of he gets really into the idea that General Electric is like a benevolent company, and they have him go around and talk to all the union workers about how they shouldn't be like they I don't know, he wants to be the corporate friend. He basically became the face of a corporation, and he even lived in the fucking GE house.
Yep.
There's some I'll find this, but there's some really fucking weird because his the GE like General Electric Theater or whatever, that whole show is filmed with like Reagan doing the that whole show is like filmed with Reagan doing the narration in between, and he's like, he comes up and he's like, the new General Electric house, and they actually like let him move into it with his family, as if he's like as if he's like in the fucking Truman Show or something. And, like literally.
Now this is an open court off our living room. Eye-catching, isn't it? The lighting is pale blue, very cool looking. This, of course, is our living room. Nancy, we'll see Patty later on.
Hello. Our lighting in here is rather interesting, too. See? Over the sofa and over each chair are individual lights built right into the ceiling. They do marvelous things for the room.
Around the edges of the room, set in the ceiling, are rows of fluorescents. They bathe the walls in light, make the room more alive and cheerful. And bigger, too. Notice?
Now, over here in the dining room, the mood's entirely different. See, up there in the ceiling? Around the chandelier are a string of lights, 12 of them, like a necklace of jewels.
Some are pink, some gold, some blue-white. When they're all on together, we have a white effect. By turning the knobs of this dimmer, we can change the colors, mix them, and get different effects.
You can have a warm yellow tone, or a more flattering pink, or a cool blue. I wish you could see the colors.
We can make the lights softer, or bring them up higher. Now I want to show you the most exciting thing.
Well, let's save the big surprise to last, shall we?
All right. Lighting helps us live better all over the house. Now, if this weren't a company night, we'd probably find Nancy in the bedroom.
Reading, and the light's just perfect for it. The correct distance up and behind. And look at this. A switch that controls the lights all over the house, inside.
So yeah, you get the.
It's like an episode of Person to Person.
But it's so weird to think that like that's their house.
You're right.
Like, you know what I mean? Like they're touring through like this. I mean,
the bedroom.
They have Reagan as like this empty figurehead, like living on a set, pretty much. I mean,
yeah.
And like he's so like vapidly empty, because he's like this is bathed in a beautiful blue.
This is
like
it's
this cool.
You can have the light.
Blue is a cool color. How
also it's black and white. Also, it's black and white. So like, it's not even like you can see the colors they're showing you. I mean, they make the joke about that, but like, it's really funny that they chose to describe it that much. And the yellow one's here, and this
yellow one's here, and then you could change the lighting on the. Oh my god!
We can make it bisexual lighting.
They said like a strobe light. What does strobe light mean today in the 2020s?
This is where Nancy and I swing.
Well, she is quite well known for that.
Right.
Our guests are coming. I have to put my keys in the bowl now.
Here's where we keep the keys in the bowl for myself and the other guest.
And these are Quaaludes.
We keep the bunch of the Quaaludes until we let them out of the closet.
We have a little bit of cabinet of everything, so if our guests want to do.
The Friedmans are here. Milton Friedman and his wife. We gotta. Yeah. So during that time, he's literally just turning into like this vapid corporate entity, which he kind of was, in his in the days that he was doing the Screen Actors Guild, because he was kind of known as like he was known as like the actor that wouldn't really play hardball with the studio system. So like he's kind of like, oh, like maybe a little bit more like money, maybe we should fight for like slightly better contracts. But he knew that essentially he was going to do whatever the studio system wanted, which is why GE, I think, really was like, oh, well, why don't we just have him like literally turn into like a fucking walking GE commercial?
And that's why there's that great clip from the Smothers Brothers where they're like, 15 years in the future, President Reagan, and that was the the laugh line right there.
That's like so cryptic. That is very cryptic.
One of the funniest parts of Nixon Land are when they describe Nixon going on Smothers Brothers and going, "Sock it to me."
That's like one of the most famous episodes of Smothers Brothers.
Yeah. No,
that was laughing. That was something different.
Oh, that was
Rowan Martin's laughing. Yeah.
No, Smothers Brothers they took that pro-war song and they made it anti-war by the set and didn't tell the country singer, and he was like really furious.
They let Pete Seeger.
No. They had a right-wing country singer. This is something different. They had a right-wing country singer come on the show, and it was like a mandate from the because it was like the #1 song, and they hated the song, and I do not remember the song, but they brought the guy on. They ended up like creating this graveyard set that he couldn't see, and so as he's playing the song, they lift the curtain, reveal the graveyard, which completely changed the meaning of a song. So here's this ironic, not really ironic, but like false, heartfelt, like soldiers go off to war kind of song. And then, with the graveyard in the background, made it an this big anti-war statement. They got in a lot of trouble for that. But it was like one of their best moments.
They also let Pete Seeger come on for the first time in like a really long time. Like he was banned from TV for getting blacklisted. And
he was blacklisted. Yeah,
he was like he wasn't like they weren't allowing him on studio. Like they canceled his appearance at the studio, and like I don't know. There was this whole thing with Pete Seeger. Like CBS wouldn't allow Pete Seeger to come on, and finally, like the first time he came on, it was on it was on Smothers Brothers, and there's like a famous clip where he plays. I think Pete Seeger was blacklisted. At least he was part of the FBI. FBI was.
He admitted he was a communist.
Yeah, he was. Him and Lee Hayes were blacklisted folk singers.
He was like a, I want to say like a communist, but he was also a radical.
Yeah, I met Pete Seeger because I live, he ended up like moving. I mean, he always kind of lived in the Hudson Valley, but his big thing was the river. He tried to get the Hudson River to get cleaned up, and so he was part of Riverwatch, and they put on this Clearwater Festival, and he was. I mean, this is like he's in his 90s at this point. When I was there, I think I was like 13 or 14, and I mean now obviously he's passed away. He lived forever though.
Right.
And my brother ran up.
He lived to age 99.
Yeah, my brother got like my little brother got a picture taken with him, and like if I knew that like this is where I was going to end up as a career and as my political leanings, I would have been so much more like gung ho about.
I went to that festival a couple of times, and I saw him there, and I never got a chance to actually, get my picture taken with him or anything like that. But kind of wish I had. But
so I wanted to get your thoughts on Manchurian Candidate. And I think I think the Reagan thing was a perfect lead into this.
Right.
First of all, it's kind of interesting that that documentary that Reagan helped create was like a complete fabrication. The politicians, like a bunch of American politicians, wanted to make sure that wanted to give an excuse for why some Americans had defected during the Korean War, because it was something that they had never really seen happen on that public scale. So they're like, oh, why would they defect? And it was like, well, the communists were brainwashing them, which started this whole jump-started this whole fear of like, oh, communists have figured out how to brainwash people. Communists have figured out before we did. And I have the Stephen Kinzer clip from when he's talking about his book on MK Ultra.
The word brainwash was invented by a CIA propagandist who, and it was used to promote the idea that people who had dissenting or unusual ideas in American society must have been brainwashed. And I can understand why they might have wanted to create this fantasy, but the strange thing was they themselves then fell for their own fantasy. The other episode happened with Korea. So after the Korean War ended, several thousand Americans who had been held prisoner in Korea came home. And it turned out that a number of them had signed statements criticizing aspects of American life. In some cases had confessed to war crimes, including dropping germ bombs on North Korea, which we swore that we had never done. So the explanation also came out. How could any of our strapping young men write things like that, say things like that? Answer, they were brainwashed. And it's actually an interesting footnote to this. I found one memo, tried to figure out how the brainwashing had happened. It said that while the prisoners were being transported from North Korea across China to release points in Europe, several of them reported that they'd gone through kind of a blank area where they might have been poisoned, and that was in Manchuria. That's where the name of Manchuria became associated with all this.
Yeah. So, so coming up with this, this excuse for why Americans, just some American soldiers had, in prison camps, but still like had defected because, American soldiers don't defect. Like America's the greatest place on earth and we build our soldiers strong. The excuse, of course, becomes this pseudo documentary that Reagan helps create that kind of explains it to the American public. Like, oh, don't worry. Like they've just been brainwashed. They've been conditioned. And, a few years later, after the Korean War, that's when the Manchurian Candidate is written and follows that plot. Which I guess I want to ask, first of all, there's definitely elements of satire in it, right? Like there's a lot of things in it that seem like they're done either as digs or as, like lines. Like it's not, it doesn't feel like a patriotic movie. It kind of feels like a very dark, cynical movie. Like none of the
we're talking about Manchurian, yeah.
Yeah. It's obviously like we talked about the Hays Code in the first episode, and the Hays Code is still at play. Like, if somebody gets shot or if someone murders somebody else, like they have to die themselves. But like it's not like I don't know. Like I guess the treatment of the Sino-Soviet leaders in it is kind of they're kind of comedic and jokerish almost. But like I think the stepfather was an almost perfect like representation of like McCarthy, and
right.
Angela Lansbury's character, like as the mother, ends up kind of being like the power broker that actually is working for the Soviets. So I don't know.
Both movies, I think, really kind of both Parallax View and Manchurian Candidate are part of like this zeitgeist, and I hope I'm not breaking up right now. Like in the especially in the 70s, but I don't quite know where this kind of came. It seems prescient that it happened in the 70s. The 60s. When Manchurian Candidate came out. Like this is, I think it's even before Kennedy was assassinated.
Yeah, it was like a year before Kennedy.
So there's a certain prescience.
There's a story that I guess.
So there's
Frank Sinatra bought the rights to the movie. And took it out of circulation and claimed it was because of Kennedy, but it was like so far after the Kennedy assassination, everybody kind of has like the evidence would suggest that's not true. That's not why.
Right. Well, he broke with Kennedy, I think, around that time. He was good friends, Frank Sinatra, with JFK, and then he broke with Kennedy because of Bobby Kennedy, who was the AG at the time, basically told the president, hey, your friend Frank Sinatra, he's got ties to organized crime, and he was supposed to stay at um, at Sinatra's residence in New Jersey. I think it was New Jersey. I'm not sure. But he was like, Bobby Kennedy's like, well, you can't stay there because of his ties to organized crime. So stay with Bing Crosby instead. And Bing Crosby, of course. What's that?
No, I said you can't do that. You
Uh,
want to be friends with Frank Sinatra.
well, no, Kennedy stayed with Bing Crosby.
Yeah, no, but I'm saying like as like a betrayal of their, or seen as Sinatra.
Yeah, and that's kind of his move later on in the 70s towards from being a Democrat to a Republican. He rejected the liberalism of George McGovern and became Nixon supporter, and in the 80s became very much a supporter of Reagan.
Yeah, well, I mean, so much of his politics were personal relationships. You know what I mean? Like, he was a longtime friend of Kennedy, obviously, but he was also a longtime friend of Reagan. So, it's interesting that I think Sinatra's politics were based on who he has the best personal relationship with. Like, as an enthusiastic, because at one point he was kind of an enthusiastic, like, liberal figure. But it doesn't seem like, it just seems like he kind of molded his politics to whoever he thought would, like, would invite him to be cozy at the White House.
Right.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of people like that.
And,
I mean,
you are right.
Be honest.
But by the way, Forrest, you are right. You can't do that today. You couldn't be friends with people who are of opposite political beliefs. You have to have the same belief or something similar. That's just how it is.
I mean, it's interesting to, almost as a comparison to Reagan, like it feels like with Reagan, he ends up going into this kind of inner circle of like weird, like this is touched a lot in Rick Perlstein's book on Reaganland. Like he gets into this weird circle of this circle of like libertarian economists, like Milton Friedman and his wife, and like they all end up being kind of these informal advisors to him, but also like friends. Like it's almost like like one of those like bohemian circles, but instead of being a bohemian circle, it's like a weird fucking libertarian like cesspool.
Well, that's the other thing about what I mentioned earlier about Reagan's politics. Yeah, he was in the 40s and 50s, yeah, he was very much a Hollywood Democrat, supporter of FDR and the New Deal. And,
yeah, like to the point of like making radio broadcasts about how great the New Deal was, and like pretty, I guess, vociferously defending it. And I don't think that that's necessarily like that's not out of a personal loyalty the way that his later politics are. I don't think. I think he genuinely was a vapid New Deal liberal, but I mean a New Deal liberal nonetheless. He also it's such a weird thing that he later had convinced himself that he had served in World War II, despite basically just being on a Hollywood set. And as like his brain started to go, like he described the plot of the war movie that he had made on a Hollywood set as if it was like
and portrayed that as being in World War II. Yeah.
Like my time in the war, and everyone had to be like, you were not
in the World War II. You were on a movie set portraying the war.
So I'm going to continue the Stephen Kinzer thing. It goes on for a couple more minutes, and he talks about the Manchurian Candidate as a movie.
Regarding the Manchurian Candidate, it's really a very interesting story. First of all, I think the description that you gave is amazingly accurate. It's true. The only ones who really believed this stuff was possible were the people inside. They consulted other people, like, for example, at the Menninger Clinic. They consulted the Menninger brothers, leading psychologists around this famous psychoanalytic institute, and they both told them, this is nonsense. You're barking up a crazy tree. This is never going to result in anything. But since that wasn't the right answer, that was just filed away. And there were other people writing in places like Argosy and True Magazine who told them, yes, it was true. So they loved that stuff. One of these guys they actually hired as a consultant. So I just want to mention a little bit about the Manchurian Candidate, though, specifically. I found a very interesting memo that remarked about this, and I believe that the author of this actually commented on it during a Senate hearing. So the book of the Manchurian Candidate was the first time that masses of Americans were exposed to the idea of brainwashing. But it came out just at the time when inside the CIA, chemists were reaching the conclusion that mind control is a myth and there can never be any such thing as a Manchurian Candidate. So this guy, this chemist actually says that movie caused us, that book and movie caused us a lot of problems, because just as we discovered that something couldn't happen, the whole world began to believe that it could.
So in 1952, during the Korean War, the Soviets captured an American platoon and take them to Manchuria in communist China. After the war, the soldiers returned to the United States, and Staff Sergeant Raymond Shaw is credited with saving their lives in combat. And I guess that's a really funny place to start, because I think part of like the cynicism of it is that clearly like the joke is that, Raymond Shaw is like incredibly unlikable. Like there's nothing likable about his character at all. He has like mother issues. He's kind of just like this like, I don't know, like angry, like just, stick up his ass, like puppet for his family, for his whole life. And he's like wound tighter than anything. And even his wife says, I know he's like wound up tight in knots, but he seems different when he's with me. So the fact that the Chinese and Russian like scientists are able to brainwash them, and then he becomes the one that they're all sitting there and like, he's the best man I've ever met. He saved the whole platoon. He's incredible. Like
yeah, of course the movie starts off really hard to get into because of how clunky it is. Because Frankenheimer's like fighting because it's directed by John Frankenheimer, who is a fantastic director.
Well-known director.
But like he's fighting with the show don't tell kind of thing, because like you don't want to ruin the surprise of like what actually happened. But what you do want to but what they did try to do was to show how unlikable the character is. I don't think that was successful. And then there was like a bunch of narration to explain like what the story is. And so it's kind of like
really, the narration's hard to get into. It almost
I mean, like where they started, like I understand why they did what they did, but it was just really tough because like it was it's 1960 whatever
62.
So like as film, they haven't quite developed the modern language of trying to tell this kind of story that way. I don't know if when they started using like showing media to express like what's actually going on, but that would have been actually kind of nice having like a news reporter like explaining it instead of a narrator.
Yeah,
because the narrator
it's documentary-esque, but then at the same time they don't want to commit to that, so it's kind of like this weird like half newsreel, half documentary, half like narrator reading you a book. And
and then it stopped like right after that. So
it's like they don't want to be like exploitive of anything yet. And
I just thought
that's
that
all I could think. They don't want to exploit a lot of things, and the movie business.
It's interesting that they chose to end it when they end it when the Russians drive away with them, or fly away with them, like what I mean, like they end it so you don't really see what happens yet, so you're just kind of like, all right, so they got captured, and then it like flips right to Raymond Shaw standing like and getting the Medal of Honor, and his insane power hungry mother and stepfather that he hates, like turning into this whole public display because he's running for office and everybody's staring at him and he hates being stared at. He's like this. He did a good job making it awkward, I think. But he was definitely an awkward character, but maybe not unlikable, I guess. It is. I mean, it is very interesting that he the stepfather seems to be a direct representation of like McCarthy. Like it seems like it's not that hard to like watch the McCarthy hearings or something and see like this alcoholic, like loud, like empty shell of a character just barking like communists, 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 communists. The mother and the father and this thing. I wanted to get your guys' take on this, I guess. When they're in the weird campaign plane, and there's like this bar that they've created with these like weird strobe lights, and they're just kind of distracting this like cute character.
Strobe lights.
Like he's like, look what they did. It's so fun. They're taking the pain out of campaigning, which I thought was a really funny line. But it's just like applying him with alcohol. The same. I mean, he's brainwashed too, kind of like. his mind has been cleared out by the liquor.
And I mean, Angela Lansbury's just killing it as like, you know, I have complaints about like every other performer in the movie except for like the main guy because he's supposed to be awkward and like he does his role correctly, but he's very unlikable. Angela Lansbury
is like more of a British accent than like a transatlantic accent.
Yeah, but Angela Lansbury makes this movie right here. Like, this is her film, and every scene she's in, she's just like, yeah, it's, you know, what are you gonna do? I'm in the scene. Pay attention to me.
Yeah. So so we watched this Frank Sinatra having this nightmare that's recurring where he's they're all listening to this lady at like who's doing a hydrangea convention, and then slowly it fades away, and they've been brainwashed by the one of the Chinese scientists who's standing above, showing that, you know, these are brainwashed men, and he's made them believe that they're smoking cigarettes and just like in a New Jersey hotel, like waiting for, you know, this convention to get over, and so they're just kind of bored sitting there. And, you know, one of the weirdest things, and it was in the book too, was the cigarettes were yak dung or something. They're making them. There's some line, and he's like, they're smoking yak dung. Like, they're like, so they're humiliating them, and the plan is that they're going to turn Raymond Shaw, who's the most unlikable out of everybody, into like an assassin. So you know, he shows that like first he murders the youngest guy that he says, you know, who's your least hated person in the platoon, because this whole platoon hates him. And he hates them, and it's like they detest each other. So he strangles in like a very, I mean, it's kind of crazy that they allowed this at this point, but he strangles like the one guy, and then after that he they make him take out his pistol and or like they make him take out a gun and shoot the youngest person in the that's like too young to even be in service. They make him shoot him in the forehead, and it's pretty fucking graphic, and the blood hits the Stalin portrait. So
I also love the fact that like the two lead Asian actors in the film are not actually Asian, because the translator is I think half South American, I forget exactly where his family's from, and half Italian. and then the guy he's from New Jersey, the bald guy, and he's like he's from Sudan. His family's from Sudan, and he was born in New Jersey.
They did that a lot in older movies. Like a lot of times they have like a Greek or an Italian guy playing like an Arabic character, or like
no more boom.
Yeah. Oh, exactly. Well, that guy was Greek.
Yeah.
In that, but like, yeah, no, they're just, yeah.
Well, all Greeks do that, you know.
But the guy that wrote "Kiss Me Deadly" was Greek. Like he was a Greek American. So it's interesting that he's kind of piling on his own ethnicity. Like he was from Greece. So it's, I don't know. It's kind of funny that, like, you know, he's the one that does it. It be your own people, I guess is what I'm saying. So Frank Sinatra wakes up screaming in bed, and he's really sweaty, and he sits in front of military brass, and he's explaining this dream, and they're like, oh, so like, do you dislike Raymond? And he's like, no, Raymond Shaw is the kindest, bravest, warmest, most wonderful human being I've ever known in my life. And you heard another one of them say that when he got his Medal of Honor. And it's said in like this flat, like almost robotic, like he's the kindest, bravest, warmest, most wonderful human being I've ever known in my life. And like throughout the movie, they just keep saying this.
Yeah, and they also, this is also throughout the movie, there's a lot of like Frank Sinatra upper lip, like sweat. Like he's just constantly sweating right here, and they're just constantly close up on it.
So let's get a close up of the upper lip sweat.
Yes, it's just
New York.
It's like Frankenheimer going, "Come on, get another close up. Come on, Frankie, sweat, just sweat. Make your upper lip sweat."
Splash water.
Are you right? Yeah. Or you can't sing in this movie. Does Frank sing in this movie?
No.
He doesn't. Oh,
I kept expecting when he was on the train though, they're New York. Where are you headed? So he gets pushed out of the top brass in the army and put on this like public relations duty. where that's the moment that, you know, Raymond's stepfather decides to get up and go there. And this is my favorite bit in the whole movie, where he goes, there's 182 communists in the Defense Department, which is the McCarthyite thing. But then throughout the conversation, the number keeps changing because Angela Lansbury won't give him a set number. So it goes from like 168 to like 212 to like 58 when he finally demands a number from her, which is like such a drop off at that point.
Was it 50? Right. No, it was 57 because of the Heinz 57 sauce.
How old is Lansbury at this point?
She's like in her 40s, I think. She was born in the 20s, like late 20s. So she's like pushing 40. She's the same age as her son. Like there's
she's alive to this day. Like
she's like in her 90s. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, no, but she's like 3 years older than the actor who played her son. So, you know, which is very impressive.
Yeah. And you can tell at some points the amount of makeup they put on her when it gets close enough to her face. Her face is kind of a lot.
So much makeup. Just so much.
Which she's used to, I'm guessing, because, you know, her theater career is so much more prolific than her.
Definitely.
But I mean, she really is fantastic. Like,
she is
she's an amazing actress.
Yeah, I don't want to, you know, like I love the reason why I like the movie was because of Angela Lansbury. It's like, you know, honestly, this might be my favorite thing, you know, better than like those really, really campy episodes of Murder, She Wrote.
I think it's harder to be a stage actor or a stage actress than it is to be a film actor.
Yeah, movie, TV.
In the sense of like, you don't have the ability, like you can't stop the show in the middle of it and go line. You know what I mean? Like if you don't, like you have to do the lines, you have to show up. It's not like there's takes. It's not like there's anything like that. It's not like, you know, they can kind of, which I think they do a lot of times in movies, like with people like Brando who kind of are in decline, like they'll stop and start and kind of like redub the guy's dialogue or like make it look like he's like kind of try to find shots that go together, or like, you know, you don't have that opportunity.
Well, I mean, they were doing that with Elvis too, like at the end of his life. They would like record a song, do as many takes as it takes, and then cut all the different takes into one song. And like that's like his last couple of albums were all made like that. So
his health problems obviously got in the way.
But I mean that's the thing with like you know, but like Angela Lansbury, like you know, up until she retired in the 90s, she you know, when she was on screen, she was commanding it. And you know, not a big Murder, She Wrote fan, but like, you know, I can game respects game right there. Like she's a star. I mean, you know.
Yeah, definitely.
So
I'm not a big fan of Murder. Well, you know, I have mixed feelings about Murder, She Wrote. So I'm not the biggest fan either, but I can respect it.
No, like you give me a campy episode, I will watch the hell out of that thing. But
well, it's like streaming every day on Peacock, so it's like or any streaming place, so it's like it's always on, so you can't really help it.
Yeah,
it's like Law and Order.
Yeah, it's absolutely.
We gotta try to get through this before you gotta run off to. All right, so he's pushed out of the top brass, and he's kind of now this PR army guy, and he can't stop the defense secretary from screaming back at the McCarthy stepfather character, and so he even says like, hey, maybe you shouldn't be screaming at a senator right now, and the guy just does it anyway. Like he's ineffectual at that job. So I mean, because you know, politics is a dirty game, and he's not made for that. So in this moment, we kind of realize that another of the army people in the platoon also is having the exact same reoccurring dream, and you see a little bit more of it, and he wakes up, and you know the fact that they're both having this dream now, you know, the army has to start kind of taking it seriously and trying to examine like whether or not like you know what happened during this valiant rescue, quote unquote, where like, you know, two platoon members were killed. So Iceland, who's the stepfather, you know, it continues this whole crusade against the Defense Department, saying there's communists. The numbers keep switching, but you know, it's insanely popular because they're in the middle of the Cold War, and there's just chaos coming from this, and you know, of course the as we learn throughout the movie, like he is, well, Angela Lansbury and him are the real Soviet agents that are working with them, and Raymond, as their son, which I really don't believe when she says it's incidental on her end, like, oh, I didn't know that it was going to be you. Like, it seems like she's been grooming him for this her entire life. Would make more sense.
Now, do you think he, the senator knew that he was working for Russia, or was he just a useful idiot?
Well,
because she was always just like, you shouldn't think, darling. Let me do the thinking. Like she's what people think Nancy Reagan was.
Yeah. Well, I mean, arguably, probably what, at least in the last couple of years, what Nancy Reagan was.
The power behind the throne.
Or Clinton.
I'd say
yeah.
I don't know. I don't think it really matters. I mean, it's interesting that the title, The Manchurian Candidate, can obviously go for, Raymond as like the candidate they chose to be an assassin, but it can also go for the stepfather. Like, yeah, he's a useful idiot. I don't know how much he knows, but he's in on the assassination plot. He's, you know what I mean? Like, he's sitting there sweating all over the place.
His upper lip.
Yeah. So he has to know. He has to know something. He has to know that he's going to be put in place of the. That's way later in the movie, but still. We kind of see how this whole thing works with Raymond. He kind of gets taken in to be like service pretty much, and he's gotten this job as a newspaperman with the character that weirdly resembles like William Randolph Hearst almost, but like a more reform minded, like pre obviously like Citizen Kane like era William Randolph Hearst, like or someone like that, like a crusading progressive journalist, I guess, populist journalist. So it was like the most famous political gadfly in the country, and he's like the assistant to him. And they stage this car accident so he can end up in the hospital. And when he gets there, it's like they're servicing his brainwashing. And I think that's one of the funniest scenes in the movie, because there's that there's a couple really great lines of dialogue. Like when the scientist is like telling the guy to laugh or whatever, and you can tell they really hate each other. And he's saying at one point he goes, my wife gave me a huge shopping list at Macy's.
Oh, he was the best. I mean, like I just wish he could have done it in his native New Jersey accent.
You're talking about Sinatra?
No.
The guy that played
the Chinese
Yen,
bald doctor.
Yeah, Yen. I think his name's Yen Lin or something.
The two Asian characters have very similar names, and one had hair and one didn't. So just be like Baldy and hairy guy.
You said New Jersey, Indian, so I was thinking Sinatra.
Yeah, one was born in Jersey, and the guy who played the translator, he was born in Brooklyn.
Huh.
The one guy that becomes the translator is kind of reminiscent of like Kato from like that role. Like,
yeah, I know that the kung fu fight with Frank Sinatra was just like ridiculous because they both are bad.
Yeah. So he needs to, like, they show you how the conditioning works. The first phrase that opens up the first door is like, how about you play a nice game of solitaire? And so he starts to play solitaire, and as he does it, he pulls out the Queen of Hearts and the Queen of Diamonds. And the Queen of Diamonds, the red Queen of Diamonds is kind of the signal to open up the next pathway in his brain. Which then from there they're able to there's a joke early in it where they say that, which I guess is where we should have known that the mother was whatever. It says the Queen of Diamonds is reminiscent of his horrible mother or something. And you think that's because she's a famous American figure or something like that, but it's not, At least that's what I thought when I first started watching it. So he gets he assassinates his boss just as like a test to see if his like conditioning is still working. And it's kind of a terrifying scene. He walks in with his like, still looking like he came out of the hospital and just, shoots the guy and it fades to black. We find out that, 100% the things that happened that they claimed happened that gave him his Medal of Honor were all set up by the Soviets. And he's literally just going to be a political assassin for them. And there's some American operative, and they don't make it clear who it is, but someone in America is going to give him instructions for like a final plot. And he, and obviously the thing is that he's unaware that any of this has taken place. Once he snaps out of the hypnotism.
And what's great is that the translator is the perfect MacGuffin for this.
Yeah.
Because he was kind of like, he doesn't actually end up serving a purpose other than to distract us from his mother, since we've already revealed that, she's his handler.
And I mean, he's there to assist the mother too, because to sneak, like he can get into the house of the So he tells the story to Sinatra, Sinatra's kind of come to watch him to see, like, because Sinatra at one point they show the generals from the Soviet army and the generals from the Chinese army, and they're showing like and Sinatra and the other guy point out the exact same generals, like those are the ones that we saw in that room, which the army at that point is like, okay, this is definitely a brainwashing plot. So Sinatra is seen as the guy that can kind of get in there and spend time with Ray, because no one else likes him and no one else wants to spend time with him. So he ends up coming to the city and hanging out with him. And before Sinatra is finally granted this validity, he like meets a girl on a train, and there's a whole long sequence where it's just sad Sinatra like waiting to find out whether or not the army is going to have his back, quote unquote, going on a vacation. And he finally gets back to Washington just in time to point out those two. It's his triumphal moment, I guess, because he's proven that they have been brainwashed. So yeah, I guess that's kind of out of order, but so Raymond starts telling him about the story where for the first time in his life he was happy, and he met this girl named Josie, and he had gotten a snake bite, and the snake bites him, and she's like ecstatic because her father is really interested in snakes and wanted to see someone get a snake bite, and was interested to see what was going to happen with that. And then finally she brings him to the house and they take care of him, and you find out that her father's a senator that's a incredibly liberal, very on the liberal side of the Republican Party, and
which existed back then.
Yeah, very much.
And he's the arch nemesis of literally the arch nemesis of Raymond's stepfather, to the point where he even had sued the mother for defamation for calling him a communist, which is their that's their I mean, it's funny, we're slowly finding out that she's a communist, or she's working with the communists, but every time someone says anything, they're like literally like the McCarthy family, like every time anyone disagrees with them, communist, like that's their political tactic, or that's their their fear-mongering tactic.
That's the one thing they point to.
Yeah, just like Republicans now.
Oh yeah.
The Iceland side of the Republican Party won out.
It was very like it's like proto QAnon.
Yeah. So it's kind of making fun of the John Birch Society. I didn't actually realize that the John Birch Society's high point was that close to the McCarthy hearings. I thought that at that point they were kind of falling, like because that really is QAnon. Like that's like a early 20th century or mid 20th century version of QAnon. Like
they still have a website.
Yeah. I don't know. I guess the high point of their political power was when they had both Reagan and John Wayne, kind of as on again, off again members of the John Birch Society.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, you're definitely right about the 50s, because
they were established in 58, but like in 54, Walsh wrote a book about John Birch, the life of John Birch. Mm-hmm. So this was like kind of a fictional character that they kind of rally around, almost like how John Galt is for Randians.
Yeah. This woman that he's in love with, her and her father are like the closest thing to like friendly people that Raymond's ever had, and he's completely in love with her. But then in the end, the mother wins out, which it's definitely foreshadowing the level of brainwash vapidity, I guess, that he has, because the mother always seems to win out at the end of at the end of everything, before he's even brainwashed. Angela Lansbury decides to rekindle their romance in an attempt to get the stepfather put in as the vice presidential ticket in the Republican Party, because he's vying for it, and this her father is vying for it, and they thought if they could make the political marriage work, then he'd probably get it. So they set up this whole elaborate party where, she ends up dressed as the Queen of Diamonds, the new fiance, and she's dressed up as the Queen of Diamonds, and Raymond gets hypnotized somehow by her, like because he's now seeing the trigger mechanism. Senator Jordan makes it clear to Mrs. Iceland that he will move for her husband's impeachment if he makes any attempt to seek the vice presidential nomination. The marriage or their version of the marriage starts to fall apart, which they end up deciding to elope. And Frank Sinatra has realized what's happened by now and is coming to try to talk to Raymond about turning himself in. And Raymond's kind of over the moon and ecstatic, and it doesn't want to listen to him. He gives him 2 days to finally come and turn himself in, and Raymond's not listening to him, but she promises that in 2 days she'll have Raymond contact him. And so Frank Sinatra leaves and is really conflicted about leaving, but knows he's not going to get anywhere with him right now. He's not even listening to anything he's saying, and they're both drunk. And Raymond goes to rub it in his face to his mother that he's eloped, and the mother at this point sends off his conditioning, and sends him to go kill his new father-in-law. So he arrives there and he's still hypnotized, and he slowly points the gun, and the guy's it takes the guy a really long time to realize that that's what's happening, because why would you?
Why do you have a gun? Why is there a silencer on the gun? Wait a second, you're here to kill me.
Yeah, so he.
To be honest though, years ago, I met Harrison Ford, and my first thought whenever I met Harrison Ford was, "Wow, this tall guy looks like Harrison Ford." And then I start speaking to him, and he answers me back, and I think to myself, "Hey, this tall guy sounds like Harrison Ford. I wonder if he knows." And then at that point, I realized, it was Harrison Ford, but. It's like there's this it's completely believable. Like if you've ever been in a situation like that, where you meet Harrison Ford or have the gun pulled on you.
Yeah. And by someone who you think is is now family. It's not in a situation that would make any sense. But so the new wife comes in and sees him shooting the father a bunch of times. And his orders are anyone who sees him assassinate someone, he has to assassinate them too. So he assassinates his new bride that he's in love with, and he assassinates the father-in-law, and he takes off. And Sinatra's looking for him everywhere, because at this point he's realized that he fucked up, and he takes it extremely personally, and is just Raymond doesn't realize that he's done anything because he's still hypnotized. So there's like this weird Frank Sinatra feels like he's the one that's messed up, and he has to take that all on himself because he's the only one that's really knowing what's happening. And he just didn't think that it was going to be that soon that any kind of orders would come out, because the mother basically jumped the gun on any political moment. She just wanted the rival out of the way, because she's not only just aligned with the Soviets, she's extremely power hungry in her own right, and she has no allegiance to them any more than she's allegiance to anybody else. So in the course of Marco's investigation, he discovers the role of the Queen of Diamonds when Raymond plays solitaire in front of him, and he realizes that must be the mechanism, because Raymond walks out of the bar and walks out into the street and jumps into a lake.
The toughest scene in the movie.
Yeah, doesn't understand why he did it. So he finally finds Raymond, and he wants to cancel out his brainwashing, and he thinks the best way to do it is just to set it off and say to him, which this is the most irresponsible thing he does in the entire movie, I think, because he should have just done a simple command and not just like a whole speech. So for some reason, Sinatra decides that 2 Queen of Diamonds might have more of an effect than 1 Queen of Diamonds, and for some reason he decides that's probably twice the hypnotism. So he starts yelling at him, and he explains, that he's been brainwashed, and he says, "You're done. It's over. Like, you're no longer brainwashed." But then he goes into this whole tirade where he's like, "You hear it? You don't play solitaire anymore. If someone asks, you say it's over, kid. I'm out of the baseball field." Which these are all different orders, but I feel like in a more literal movie, he would have just taken off and started walking to a baseball field.
Right.
But it seems to kind of work. It snaps him out of it. But then just at that moment, the phone rings, and he walks hypnotized over to the phone and answers it. And it's the mother finally ready to give him orders, which the orders are, of course, that, the father is to be given the vice presidential nomination. And just as the president is making a speech, or the new president elect or nominee is making a speech, Raymond is to enter the little booth at the top, the projector's booth, and he's to have a sniper. And they don't really play it up throughout the movie, but like he's supposed to be like unmissable with a sniper rifle. They kind of say it at a couple points, but like they don't really stress that. But he's supposed to shoot the guy, and the father is going to stand up and put the guy's dying in his arms, and he's going to give this speech that the mother, who sounds batshit insane at this point, just rally the entire country to their feet, and they're going to be like, oh, it doesn't really matter that he's dead. And she thinks that suddenly they're going to have so much power, it's going to make martial law look like I don't remember how she exactly puts it. She's like,
the JFK Jr. is going to join the tickets, and yeah. It's going to be great.
So there's this long scene where the army decides they're not going to intervene, and really on behalf of Raymond, they're just kind of going to let this play out after all that. And he stumbles up hypnotized up to this projection booth, and you're wondering kind of like, is he still hypnotized, or is he doing this, like, has he just decided to do it at this point? Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's not really explained, and it's not just kind of chasing after him, despite the fact that nobody in the army will help him out for whatever reason. So he gets up there with the sniper rifle, and he's like waiting for the guy to give the speech and to do the signal, and you're waiting and you're waiting and you're waiting, and finally
the national anthem plays.
Yeah,
and Frank Sinatra has to stop and salute the entire time.
That's another 3 minutes to lose. And
like, how very Republican of him.
Yeah,
guy, definitely.
So, this is really, I think this is really well shot, the end of the movie, because he has the sniper, he has the sight trained on the presidential candidate for the full 3 minutes, as if he's going to shoot him. And just as the guy says the line, he tilts the gun like this and shoots his stepfather and his stepmother and kills them both. And Sinatra finally runs in and sees what he's done, and he's like, nobody else is going to do it, no one else is going to stop them. And as Frank Sinatra goes to like reach out, he takes the gun, puts it in his mouth, and blows his brains out. And the movie kind of ends with Sinatra kind of being traumatized and feeling like he caused all of this because he was unable to stop him at the right time. And just, so there's no happy
ending.
Yeah, this is why Janet Leigh left him and went to that hotel. No, I just, since I just brought up Janet Leigh, I just want to say like she's supposed to have been like the biggest star of that era, and she's completely wasted in this movie. Like she the only thing she does is do a little character development of Sinatra's character.
Yeah,
that's it.
She's completely one-sided, like one-dimensional, to the point where like a lot of the things coming out of her mouth just feel like gibberish.
Oh my God! Like she meets him on the train, and she's like, "I was talking to my fiance. You asked me if I was married, but you didn't ask me if I was engaged." And I told him, "We're not engaged anymore because I met you."
She's trying to sound like all suave and whatnot, and it's not coming out right.
She gives him her number and address like 5 times too. This is my number and this is my address. Please come to my address. This is my number. And so and the great scene is that like we didn't really touch on because it didn't. I wish I had like found a better synopsis. Usually the IMDb ones are pretty detailed, but in this case, like
sometimes.
This one was kind of
sometimes,
yeah. So, but like the big scene during that is that he gets arrested from the police station because he sees the translator who is now working at Raymond's house, and he runs up and just starts, they have this kung fu fight, but then he ends up just like beating the shit out of this translator because he's, it's a very Once Upon a Time in Hollywood moment, but
yeah,
it was like my favorite scene. It just all of a sudden Frank Sinatra's doing kung fu. Like,
all right, so we made it through this. This was fun though.
Yeah, absolutely, and looking forward to doing Repo Man.
Yeah.
Now joined by JG Michael from Parallax View. Good podcast, film podcast a lot of times. So we kind of went through the plot of the movie, but I wanted to replay this for you. We kind of watched it at the beginning, but there's a Ronald Reagan. I said it to you. There's a Ronald Reagan, very very strange pseudo documentary where Reagan is explaining how brainwashing occurred, and this is not like a supposed to be like a fictional movie. It's supposed to be
that.
Like,
not to interrupt you, but that's kind of funny that he's talking about brainwashing and stuff, because I don't know. Reagan's kind of like the real Manchurian Candidate of Hollywood, because he was he got involved in like the unions, but he was bought and paid for by the corporate industries.
We were just talking about that an hour ago, him being part of GE and living in a house. He had like the videotape of the house that he lived in.
Yeah. Wait, so this is we'll rewatch this. It's like 5 minutes, but it's just this fucking really, really strange this fake Korean War documentary.
Being captured by an enemy is a shocking experience for any soldier in any war. In Korea, this shock was made sharper because no one knew quite what to expect, except possibly the worst. Starvation and brutality, maybe, or torture even. Oriental torture, such as burning bamboo splinters under the fingernails. Then there'd been talk of brainwashing. Wasn't brainwashing a big thing with the Chinese? Maybe they even used narcotics.
Gentlemen, we welcome you to the ranks of the people's democracy. We are happy to have liberated you from the Wall Street warmongers who sent you here for their profit. We have nothing against you, and we want to offer you a fair proposition. All we ask is cooperation and fair play. For you, this war is over, so don't fight us. Sit back, be like others, relax, make yourselves comfortable like the other men are doing. You have nothing to fear. We want to be your friends. There are no slave camps here, no road gangs. You will not be put to work. We will give you free the best food and shelter and clothing we possibly can. Now, it won't be good by your standards. We are a poor country, but it will be the best thing we've got, and you won't have to work for it. Finally, we will give you the thing we know you really want most, a chance to learn the truth. When the warmongers have made enough money, when they let this senseless slaughter end, we just want you to go home to your own good homes and find families and simply tell them the truth, as you yourselves decide the truth to be.
Well, you've got to admit, this beats burning bamboo splinters under your fingernails. It was almost as irresistible as the deals you hear over the radio. Get it now. Don't deny yourself a thing. Sit back. No need to work. Get yours. Everybody else is getting theirs. Yes, this was pretty much the way in which our men were greeted by the Chinese and how their captivity began. In other wars, Americans have always organized together fairly soon after capture. They set up internal controls, escape committees, a military justice system, and groups to care for the sick and wounded. But in Korea, even though many months went by, effective internal organizations didn't develop. Yet during this period, there was no special indoctrination, no magical methods for the control of Americans, nothing except the usual hardships and deprivations of prison camp. And from Dr. Mayer's own standpoint, as a physician and psychiatrist, it was this period which disturbed him the most. Because it was during this period when most of the men who died.
I should say it's done from the vantage point of a fictional study where this doctor is supposedly, aka like a character actor in the lab coat, is talking to all of these soldiers that were put in a prison camp and asking like, oh, why didn't you guys escape? Or why didn't you guys, why'd you guys just let this happen? So it's like, and it's supposed to be like it's supposed to really be a documentary. Like, you know what I mean? Like their version of like a pseudo documentary. So
I was gonna say it's like hard for me to pay attention because every time I hear Ronald Reagan's voice, I want to puke.
Well,
don't we all?
Yeah.
Give-up-itis, they called it, when the weakest simply turned their faces to the wall, covered their heads, and within 48 hours were dead. If only the boy's family and school and church had helped him grasp and develop the idea of personal responsibility and obligation, had weaned him away from the belief that individual effort was painful and useless. If only he had been taught that he has the ability, even alone, to meet and solve serious problems, then this cold, terrible reality would not have destroyed him. But it was after the first few months that we began to see the communist Chinese indoctrination. The application by the Chinese of a finely developed educational program, one that occupied every day, all day, 7 days a week for the great majority of prisoners. It was a classical anti-capitalist, anti-American diatribe of the sort the communists have been publishing for years. Afterward, there were discussions in which every prisoner was forced to participate, but not by the Chinese. Oh, no.
Come on, soldier, get with it. Sum up this lecture for our instructor so we can get some chow.
Then there were the public confessions, where each prisoner was required to stand up and perform an exercise of public self-criticism, confessing to one and all his past sins against society.
Oh, we had several slaves, about 2,000 per acre. Beyond that, we owned most of the land. We drove Cadillacs all over, and there was a yacht for everybody. One for me and one for my daddy, and money was nothing to us.
Not because they believed what they heard or what they said. Nothing of the kind. They simply went along. They did what others expected them to do, even though they knew it was wrong. Why?
There were some things I wasn't too proud of. I haven't mentioned before. Like the time I took your food rations when you were sick. Or the time when I took medicine from you. And I also informed on some guys who were breaking out of Compound 14.
Well, everyone else was doing it. And to be popular, you went along too. If you didn't, well, a guy could become mighty unpopular.
All right, gentlemen, dismissed.
You had a free choice, of course. You could enjoy either popularity or respect.
Rotten crumb.
Not very many chose respect. Only a few.
So yeah, the first time we watched it, I was saying that it reminded me of those like Nancy Reagan's later like just say no.
No.
Yeah,
Right.
like it's like the peer pressure got to them. They didn't need to be brainwashed. But I mean, you know, the whole thing is just like an excuse.
Maybe I was gonna say real quick. Maybe Ronald Reagan got MK Ultra. That's why he couldn't remember about Iran Contra. Maybe that's why he couldn't remember anything.
I don't remember anything.
I do not recall.
I do not recall anything about Iran Contra, about shredding of files.
William Casey is kind of even among the intelligence community is kind of seen as like the worst CIA director, right? Like at least the one of the least liked CIA directors.
I think he was even known as like Wild Bill, right?
No, that's Bill Donovan.
No, Bill Donovan. Yeah.
Yeah, but William Casey is the Iran Contra guy, the guy that was Reagan's like right hand man, and he put in charge at one point of the CIA, despite him not really having CIA training and
experience.
Yeah, which I mean, it's probably better that people don't have experience, but then because there's no good way to put someone in as a CIA director, like, you know what I mean, like, because there's a bunch of them that were like career officers that obviously knew where every single body was buried that they put in charge, and those people are like already kind of in control of everything. But then on top of that, you know, like if you put in someone who's never been in the CIA and they're just instantly like, all right, let's continue these ops, like there's no like, just, I mean, obviously fucking abolish the CIA, but it's funny that like, you know, I can't really guess which one is a fucking worst thing. Like a lot of times they would just appoint like politicians that they liked, like when Bush Sr. got put in charge of the CIA for like a year.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, but
I was going to say real quickly, he relied on a resume of federal offices to seek the presidency in 80 and then in 88. So
yeah,
I was gonna.
He was definitely a careerist.
Yeah, no, 100%.
Just a little anecdote. There was an interview that I haven't published yet. I recorded it probably late last year, but there's a lot of audio issues with it. But it was with Gary Sick, who worked with Carter's administration when it came to Iran. And, you know, Sick is probably most known today for having written the book, The October Surprise. And there's debate over the October Surprise. And even Gary will admit that, you know, the case is ultimately very circumstantial. But he talked to Bill Casey's, like, you know, family and whatnot. And they said, oh, yeah, that's something he would do. And I thought that was the most telling anecdote in the interview.
The guy was a scumbag. I don't know.
Right.
He was a weirdo.
The October Surprise, I guess, for people that don't know, supposedly, you know, the Reagan campaign paid off Iranians to keep the hostages until after the election. So,
right.
Yeah, amongst other fuckery. I mean, they also did the thing where they stole Carter's like debate prep.
Yeah.
And like
thanks to George Will.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's crazy that he was the one that did that, or that
he was not yet a member of the ABC News staff, and he leaked it to.
No, they straight up stole it. Like
they stole it.
Carter left it behind, and he just like picked it up and was like, "Oh, I'm gonna bring this," because he was playing Carter, in Reagan's like mock debate.
Yeah, yeah.
It's also funny that Reagan's mock debate style was that he had a bunch of like one-liners on those fucking. I mean, that was a speech style.
There you go again.
One-liners.
When I opposed socialized medicine, there was another piece of legislation talking about like when he was governor of California in the 60s, how he actually supported socialized medicine before it was
well, he's talking about they're talking about Medicaid.
Yeah.
And so he was like, oh, I didn't want to like, you know, basically like, you know, make these old people not have health insurance. There was just another piece of legislation that everybody knows about that I supported that would have done the same thing. You know,
the funniest Ronald Reagan story I ever heard was from this. I mean, he's sort of a friend of mine now because I've interviewed him so much. But
Ronald Reagan?
What? No, not Ronald. Jesus, not the Antichrist. But
frequent guest Ronald Reagan.
I had John. I had John Barbour on, who he's sort of into the JFK assassination and Jim Garrison and all that, but I'm not as interested in that. I had him on because he's a big showbiz figure. He started reality television with a show called Real People back in the day, but he used to do an interview show in LA, and he had Reagan on. I mean, he had a bunch of people on the show. I think he had Cesar Chavez on at one point, Jane Fonda at the height of her anti-war protesting. But when he had Reagan on, apparently Reagan's handler was like, well, you have to tell us the questions in advance.
Yeah.
And Barbour was like, no, I'm not doing that. I do a conversation show. And if you don't like it, I'll go out there right now, 5 minutes before the show, and tell the audience that Reagan isn't wanting to do an actual conversation. After that, Reagan decided to do it, and he BS'd his way through the whole thing.
He wasn't an off the cuff guy.
Yeah.
Kind of
he was more of a, like in your face kind of thing.
Yeah.
Well, he was like a staged, like, I don't know, like a well manicured staged polished politician in the sense of like literally his thing consisted of like a bunch of index cards that would have one-liners on it, and he would literally like memorize the one-liners, and then and they would just all be like, oh, like something government, and then like, you know, like the scariest phrase is I'm from the government and I'm here to help, and he like had all of those different like jokes that people would like just kind of be disarmed and laugh at, and he would shuffle them every time, and it would be pretty much the same speech but like in a different order. But then when he went off the cuff, he would like his brain seemed to have been going for a very long time.
Yeah.
There are things that he would hear, like fictional things he would hear on TV, and he'd get confused, or like details from movies and he'd get confused. And all of a sudden, like out of his mouth would come like some statistic that no one had ever heard. And it turns out it was from like a movie that he was in like 20 years ago.
Well, he had Alzheimer's.
The funniest part of the story for me that John told me was that, you know, he tried doing this off the cuff, like, I'm going to hold his feet to the fire. And Reagan would just change the topic. Like, he'd be bringing up some serious topic, like, oh, what about the wars? And, you know, why don't we oppose the wars? And Reagan would just change the topic to something else about the American people and unity. It had nothing to do with what John was asking him about it. John said to me, you know, he was a good operator, but, you know, a horrible lying person as well.
Well, he also found out, you know, the Carter debate is a great example because, you know, their strategy was that he just wanted to make Carter appear mean. Like, that was the entire strategy. Like, he didn't have to win the debate. Carter just had to look like an asshole. Carter had spent 4 years not like being a fucking. I call Carter like a strange elven man. Like he kind of reminds me of like an elf on like wingtip shoes or something. You know what I mean? Like he was just he was strange and like odd and like austere, but like he wasn't mean. Like he was like the nice guy. So by like ruining that image that the American people seem to have of Carter, like Reagan just decimated him without even like, because they did the same thing they did with Trump, where they're like fact checking.
Yeah.
Like I know not true, and he's like
I know we're going off into a Reagan tangent, but I just wanted to say this because I've always found it interesting. Out of all the like presidents we've had since like, I don't know, Eisenhower or Kennedy maybe, but like just Reagan is, to me, he's like the Patrick Bateman American Psycho of presidents. I have no, there's nothing I can sympathize with. Like,
right.
I mean, Nixon was a horrible crook, but he's also like some guy that's bitter because he wasn't brought up within the Eastern establishment the way the Kennedys were. And I mean, you know, the 1972 visit to China, I think was important. He at least gave us like the Endangered Species Act and some environmental protections. But like Reagan just wanted to wreck the entire welfare state. It's just an empty suit. There's nothing there. You know, it's like Patrick Bateman.
Nixon was a punching bag. That's what Nixon was. Nixon had spent 50 years being a punching bag. And like we were talking about Nixon Land, like the Rick Perlstein book, and you really get a feel for it in there. Like Nixon has spent like 50 years getting just like the shit kicked out of him pretty much and just eating shit because like, you know, because every single time they're like, oh, you can't win. But he would show up every single time to like, you know what I mean? Like to campaign for whoever the person is. He'd bide his time. He would one story that Rick Perlstein had in that book was that he would travel around to every Republican fundraiser after losing the nomination with one aide and would just show up and like give these speeches. And, you know, and he almost, I mean, he was manicured in a very different way than Reagan was. Reagan obviously was like the Hollywood candidate, and Nixon had these weird people kind of trying to make like a TV thing out of him because he was so terrified of TV after his whole Kennedy debacle. So he was scripted in a very different way, but he had like the most Machiavellian, like sociopathic mind when it came to elections. Like, yeah. Like there's just nothing he wasn't willing to do. But that's kind of where his whole career was. That's why he was a fucking punching bag. Like he spent his career like there wasn't anything he wasn't willing to do. So it was like when it came time to like, I don't know, like fucking like burgle a hotel, he's like, yeah, sure.
I mean, what they did to Daniel Ellsberg is like, you know, terrible, breaking into a psychiatrist's office and whatnot. I'm not trying to. There's just something about like. There's something about Reagan that he's just. I don't know how anyone can like Reagan. I don't find anything likable about him. Just like even in the way he presents himself, I'm like, oh my god, this is the most shallow, just Hollywood human being alive.
Well, nobody can really criticize him either. I mean, he's, you know, very much elevated to sainthood in the Republican Party.
Yeah.
And after the fact, like, I don't think, like, when he left office, like, he kind of got Thatchered at that point. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it kind of was, like, his consensus, I guess, kind of fell apart towards the end. Yeah. And Bush kind of took the brunt of it, and that's why Bush...
See, but that's what's so weird about him, too, because it's like, you can... I mean... If you watch that Showtime documentary that just came out a few months ago, The Reagans, I think it came out back in October, actually. I was talking to Matt Turnauer about that, the guy that directed it, and it's a very good documentary, but, you know, the parallels between him and Trump are, like, very obvious, right down to, like, Make America Great Again. And he was in bed with Birchers back in California. So, you know.
And yet, I say, and yet none of his children ever even like approved of Trump. Like his atheist, like progressive son, Ron.
Well, he
Ron Jr. Yeah,
Reagan did not like Trump. Reagan saw Trump as kind of this like weird, cloying, like hanging on, like, you know, like because Trump tried to reach out to Reagan. Trump tried to lobby Reagan for a job at one point, like, and he even tried to criticize Reagan like harshly in the fucking in the New York Times. He took out like a full page ad, like. Trump tried to do all these different things, and Reagan couldn't fucking stand it. The difference between, I think, all of the other Republicans we've really had, maybe not Bush so much, but like Bush Jr., I mean, but like the difference between like these conservative figures, like and Reagan is that Reagan kind of had like this weird optimistic
sunny side, like morning in America.
Well, he was like a positive thinking type guy. He was obsessed with that like, positive thought movement stuff, which. It's actually Trump has some overlap with that too, but
Yeah,
like Reagan was just like, he thought the will of his mind, the power of his will, almost like in a Nietzschean way. He probably wasn't, that well read, so he didn't read Nietzsche, but you get my point. Like, he thought just the power of his imagination would move the world.
He also had an astrologer traveling around.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
He loved it. That's something I picked up from that Reagan's documentary.
But, he probably had a point though, in a way, because he was so like forceful in his like, well, I'm just right, and I'm gonna force my will down everyone's throat. That it actually worked for him. You couldn't penetrate him with criticism because he wasn't self-reflective.
Yeah,
like, but the whole thing is that I feel like he's like the distillation of American empire in that sense. Like, like all these other people, like I don't know, like Nixon had like détente, and like it was like, all right, this is like a because he really considered himself like the foreign policy like the foreign policy maven or whatever. Like he really was someone who understood the intricacies of it, and so did Kissinger. And Reagan's fucking foreign policy was just like, well, like we're not going to even like move with them unless they, you know what I mean? Like it's just so like he was the distillation of American empire because he wouldn't even work with the fucking like USSR to try to like maintain peace with them. Like he was tearing up treaties. Like he kind of just felt like it was the boot of American empire coming down fully hard, which is why I think so many like conservatives were in love with Reagan, was because like, they spent decades trying to be like, why are we even doing this whole like Cold War dance? Like we should just nuke the shit out of them. And it seemed like Reagan was the closest person to like doing that. But at the same time, I think that conservative politics in the end is kind of focused on grievance, like more than anything else. And I've been thinking about this a lot. Like the conservative brand is white hot rage, literally white hot rage, and like and just grievance politics. It's why like Tucker Carlson has done so well, because literally he's just like the embodiment of like angry grievance. Like, so Reagan's kind of the one figure that's not really like that. I mean, he's kind of sad that his movie career didn't take off, but like, like that's kind of the saddest thing you can really say about like his career.
Well, I mean, I think grievance plays a role with Reagan too, because his big thing was always, I was an FDR Democrat, man. I was an FDR Democrat. Yeah. I didn't leave the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party left me, which, that's dog whistling. We know what he means by that. But
well, it's that's why the thing with Carter was so important. He had to be sympathetic. So making Carter look mean, making it look like Carter was bullying him, despite the fact that Carter was literally just this like weird, lighthearted, like elven creature, like literally just like floating above like Carter's so fucking weird. Like after reading fucking Reaganland, I'm just like, Jesus Christ, this dude was president. 70s politicians, Democrats in general, were kind of like that. Like they were all into like all the new age shit, and like the way like it was clearly like proto neoliberal politics or like early neoliberal politics, but like the way that they said it was like as if they had like done acid a few too many times, and like they're looking at everything through like a prism. And at the moment after Nixon had just been like this force of despair, like everybody kind of was like, oh wow, maybe we'll try that. And then Reagan kind of came in and was just like, America.
I was going to say, it's funny because tying that back to the Manchurian Candidate, isn't it fascinating how I think Manchurian Candidate comes about in the film comes in 1962.
Yeah.
And like, just, in the 70s, just a decade later, we have a whole new type of paranoid thriller that is more like, oh, maybe we should be more distrustful of our own government. The Alan J. Pakula type films like All the President's Men, Clute, Parallax View, which is probably my favorite of those. But they're very different. They don't play off of the same type of paranoia. They're more like, oh, the force that is destroying the country is actually from within, and it's not an alien force either. But, just a few years prior, it was all communism and McCarthy,
That's where like the Morning in America slogan for Reagan comes in, because he comes in essentially like, after this decade where like nobody trusted our government, no one trusted, I mean, Reagan least of all, but like nobody trusted our country anymore. No one trusted the people around them. He's like, it's okay to love American empire again. So he like steps out and he's like, it's a different day. Like, and people really like clung to that because people don't want to be cynical. Obviously they kind of just at the time anyway, wanted to be like just kind of blindly patriotic. And
right. They want to be like optimistic patriots.
Yeah. Like at the time when every single thing, like media wise and like, press wise was telling you like, oh, we're wrong. Here's what's wrong. Like the Church Committee came out with the CIA, like just every like scandal after scandal. Reagan was like the one person who was willing to just like step in and be like, maybe loving America, you know, if loving America is a crime, I'm fucking guilty. And then everyone's just like, oh, look at this guy.
You know, in some ways, we're kind of back to that point. I mean, just recently, it was the Pentagon Papers, the anniversary of the Pentagon Papers.
Yeah.
And I'll give the New York Times credit. They published a piece by Andrew Bacevich, who's one of the few conservatives I agree with certain things on, especially foreign policy, because he's anti-war. He believes in climate change, thinks racism is a problem. But, you know, he published a piece in the New York Times saying, you know, we need to look back at the Pentagon Papers and learn lessons from it. But they also had to publish another piece, which was by some neoconservative goon that was saying what Ellsberg did was an assault on democracy.
Oh, that piece, when you actually read it, the final paragraph, it wasn't about Ellsberg or the Pentagon Papers at all. The final paragraph of it actually pretty much just said, and that's why we shouldn't pardon Snowden.
Right. Well, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's all part of this, like, oh, anyone who, you know, questions the system is unpatriotic.
Yeah. That guy wrote a book called It's Okay to Have Secret. Like, it's a book that justifies having secrets in the security state. Like, he's the most ghoulish of the apologists for fucking CIA activities and shit.
Well, I mean, it's just interesting because like both both parties try to play off civic nationalism these days. I mean, the Democrats do it in their own way, but there is sort of like a nationalist bent to all our politics, at least the mainstream one in America.
Oh, I wanted to. This is the other clip I took from the Reagan brainwashing thing, just to get us back, I guess, on track with this. But I agree.
Sorry for ranting.
No, it's all right. I think that I think that Biden kind of has Biden's like blind dumb optimism kind of has some parallels to Reagan in a weird way. But anyway, so this is the other clip I took from the Reagan one.
Respect, it seems, earned its own reward, not from your fellow POWs, but from the Chinese who always acted promptly.
Poor fellow. What a shame. Obviously, he doesn't place the need of the group above his own selfish purposes. We won't hurt him. We'll take good care of him, just as good as we are taking care of you.
Those heroic soldiers who did try to organize the others for escape or to resist the Chinese were segregated in special, heavily guarded camps for hopeless reactionaries. In this way, divide and conquer. Utter planned isolation of the individual was accomplished by substituting the standards and values of the group for those of the individual. Men who didn't conform, who tried to lead, were denounced as poisonous individualists and segregated as criminals. This is the fundamental device of communism, based on the idea that one man has no significance. He is just a fragment of the mass, the class. Becoming and remaining in favor with the Chinese included informing on fellow prisoners, telling about bad attitudes and reactionary remarks, or infractions of camp rules. But it really didn't mean much, because after all, the man informed upon was never punished, not actually. He had only to confess his crime to a sympathetic camp instructor, write an essay promising never to repeat his crime against society, and sign it. That's all. Now, what harm is there in this? The man informed upon wasn't really furious at the man who'd informed on him. He didn't go back to camp and try to kill him or beat him up. He never felt exactly the same about that fellow again, was careful what he said, and never got close to anyone again. He became more isolated, alone.
Man, it's cold out there. Must be 30 below. Hey, you guys are stinking up this place. Come on, you. All of y'all, outside. Come on your feet. Out. Come on, outside. Come on.
No.
Yeah, so you can see where like the Manchurian Candidate, I guess, is kind of taken right from.
Man, talk about brainwashing.
Yeah.
Having to like write an essay is like having to write an NDA. Don't ever tell anybody about it.
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
It's fucking fascinating, that whole thing, because like honestly, like my thought is like, oh wow, like Chinese fucking like intern like or whatever, like Chinese fucking prisoner camps just seem based. Like they're like, you don't have to do anything, don't worry, like just kick your feet up. And Reagan's like, that's when they get you. If they had given them the bamboo and under the fingernails, no, everyone would have escaped. But it's those nice Chinese that are, and we're not even. I mean, like obviously, like the Chinese had sent a lot of troops to fight for North Korea, but like
right,
it's not like we were at war with China specifically. Like it was a proxy war. I mean, you know what I mean? Like so, like the fact that like his entire focus is just on like the Chinese. Like you don't see Korea mentioned in that fucking movie once.
No, not at all. There's not like one single mention of Korea at all. Period.
That whole time, I just kept thinking of a really based 1960s movie called War Hunt, which I think I may be like one of the few people who has seen that movie because no one remembers it. But it stars John Saxon. John Saxon, who would later appear in movies like he was the lieutenant in Nightmare on Elm Street. He was in Black Christmas. And Enter the Dragon. He's the white dude. But it's a really interesting movie because it's an anti-war film, and he plays a member of the army who he enjoys killing and he can't stop. And it's ultimately like very much a meditation on war and how bad it is. And it's funny because no one remembers that movie, even though I think it won awards and whatnot. But everyone remembers these like documentaries and movies like Manchurian Candidate saying, "Oh, the Russians are coming. The Russians are coming."
Yeah, and I mean some of the more satirical takes on it, like Dr. Strangelove, obviously is going to be seen as like an American classic forever.
That's true.
Yeah, but like I don't know. We watched Kiss Me Deadly for the first episode, and it was kind of like it was kind of like a proto. It's like a proto like satirical look at the Cold War. I feel like because it was coming out like a year after the McCarthy hearings, which is kind of bald.
I mean, I think though you can get away with like satirical anti-war and like counterculture films back then, whereas like I don't know, the more serious ones people don't remember as much. Like there's that one Dalton Trumbo did, Johnny Got His Gun, but that movie's like really really intense. I think they used footage of it in Metallica's music video for one, but no one remembers that one either because like you do a real serious meditation on, hey, maybe war isn't all it's cracked up to be. Maybe all of this patriotism we have around, hoorah, let's go to war, maybe it's a bad thing. But you don't really see those films being remembered that much these days. I mean, Strangelove, of course, but that's more on the comedy side. Yeah,
I don't think necessarily you could get away with it in like the 50s when Kiss Me Deadly was coming out. But like in the 60s and 70s, I mean, really when Vietnam fell apart was when
New Hollywood, I think in the but by the late 60s things get a little bit more open to experimentation, because movies like Bonnie and Clyde and Easy Rider come out, and there is sort of a rebel atmosphere, I guess. Yeah.
But I mean, in the 50s you still had like the Hays Code, which is we kind of had a long conversation about that, which is like. And Manchurian Candidate too, came out, and the Hays Code was just falling apart. And you see the end of it when he takes out his mom and his stepdad. Like it was 2 years after the Hays Code had fallen apart. He still has to kill himself at the end of it.
I wanted to talk about that ending for a second here, if we could, because I love, they have that tacked on scene at the end where Frank Sinatra is like, he gave his life for love of country. And I'm like, no, I don't think Lawrence Harvey's character did it for love of country. I think he just really hated his stupid mother.
Yeah,
like,
no, 100%.
It's very personal,
He doesn't mention country once throughout that movie.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like that's never his motivation. He's just like, fuck this bitch.
Well, the other thing, the funny thing about the movie too is I think there's a little bit of ambiguity to what Angela Lansbury actually believes ideologically. I'm not sure that she's actually like committed to communism. I think she's just a power junkie.
She says she's not committed to communism. At the end of it, she says, "My plan is to exert so much power that I push out the Soviet influence." Her only ideology is power. Like, well,
that's why Jim Jordan, the one congressman that hates her, the senator that hates her, he's right about her. She's a fascist rally type.
Yeah, and I think that. I mean, it's talking really about McCarthy, like the thought that not that the Soviets aren't like, it's not that the Soviets are harmless and they're not trying to take over the government. They clearly are, but like the bigger threat in the end is Angela Lansbury like believing that she can kind of just control everything. Like she kind of is more of like a Hitler type figure almost than like a Soviet like expansionist. You know what I mean?
And
like,
I think that was very felt in Hollywood at the time. I mean, I mentioned Dalton Trumbo, he was, out blacklisted for so long. And even people that weren't necessarily completely blacklisted, people like Vincent Price. I know his daughter has talked about this before he became Mr. Horror Movie Guy in the 70s and whatnot. He was sort of like graylisted because they thought, oh, he's a pinko or something. He's one of these communist sympathizers. A lot of people suffered in the film industry because of that.
Yeah, no, and I mean,
amongst other
graylisted
things,
is a great term for it, because even the people that aren't necessarily that aren't blacklisted are kind of given like warnings. Like tons of people didn't end up blacklisted, but still had to like speak in front of the House Un-American Activities Committee, and also the people that did end up having to speak in front of the House Un-American Activities Committee and like buckling to the subpoena. Kind of a lot of them took off and weren't in films again until the 60s because they felt so bad that like people that they considered friends and like acquaintances they kind of ratted on.
Well, Lauren Bacall and Bogey Bacall, I think, or Humphrey Bogart rather, they testified in the committee and they were able to work, but I think that was some.
No, it was personal. It was like personal. People were so conflicted at that point by their own actions because they're basically snitching on their coworkers, and there wasn't any like within the fervor there wasn't any thought to like, oh, these people aren't going to be able to work for the next 30 years and they're going to be blacklisted. Like kind of just like kind of the feeling of being scared shitless by like McCarthy and like the thought that maybe there is like Soviet infiltration and like I don't know, like everything that happened during that time period everywhere in the country was pretty fucking reactionary. Like when people are like, oh, it's just the times, like in this case, like it kind of fucking is like not that it justifies anything, but like the consequences were fucking terrifying. If
I think people can be surprised too by like some of the people that sold their friends in Hollywood out, like even like Frank Capra. People don't know this because the Capra estate basically tried to cover it up for a long time, but Capra sold out a lot of his friends, because, I don't want to be called a communist. And it's funny because Capra was a lifelong Republican too. So also had a huge thing against immigrants, but there were a lot of people that just sold out their colleagues. Oh yeah, definitely. They're communists.
It's pretty funny that fucking Jimmy Stewart was one of the most reactionary people in Hollywood for his entire life. He was he was terrible.
Well, along with that, selling other people out, like Cliff Robertson, famous actor who was in No Way to Treat a Lady, sold one of his friends out for check embezzlement in the 70s when he was working for Columbia Pictures. And that actor, I think, was jailed and never worked again.
Yeah.
Cliff Robertson, worked up until his passing, up until his dying day.
I mean, there are some people that are like, like look at Reagan's type of like vapid whatever. Like he had no problem selling out anybody. Like I don't think at any point in his life he ever thought to feel conflicted about it.
Yeah.
Well, I mentioned the Capra thing too, by the way. Just everyone always finds that shocking that he would sell people out because everyone thinks of him as like, oh, his films are so pro labor and pro left, but you'd be surprised if you look into the history of it.
CIO was fucking selling people out, like.
That's true.
Like, in much of the same.
Everybody was selling everybody out, but like a lot of stuff was being kept locked up because the studios were really kind of tight knit. I think what JG was saying in the 70s, like in the late 1960s, early 1970s, throughout that period, the studios started kind of letting their guards down a little and started revealing pretty much everything that was going on in Hollywood. Now we know pretty much everything that goes on in Hollywood because the studios just don't have much control anymore.
Yeah. Well, the studio system broke.
Yeah, it broke big time.
Pretty quickly. In the 90s.
I often tell people I hope that happens again. I don't think it will though.
Well, see now the whole problem is that like it's not even there's like a studio system. It's that the media consolidation has gotten so bad that like
right.
Yeah,
you can't even imagine those companies falling apart, and you can't imagine like you know as much as he was essentially like probably the most abhorrent like person ever in fucking U.S. history, like Teddy Roosevelt and his crusade against like trusts, like during that like the reformist period, like you can't see anything like that ever happening again.
no.
You know, and you know the studio system broke because you know all of these other markets opened up, and like all of these, you know, every other country was producing movies, and if you wanted your movies made, you could just kind of start a movie theater, and you know what I mean. So like, or a movie studio, like so that's kind of when all of that stuff fell apart. But like, yeah, like the consolidation at this point is rigid, like to the point where to be on a mainstream or out of a mainstream studio anyway, like I don't think that consensus is ever breaking. The names will change, I'm sure, but like yeah, the I don't know, like it's crazy. It's crazy.
It's better. Yeah, it's like just better. Erase everything, just change the name. Then everyone forgets. Or the studios do.
Yeah. And they're not really person driven anymore. Like
yeah, not at all. It's all electronically driven.
Well, it's corporate driven. Like
yeah.
You know what I mean? Like
I often tell people, I'm like, when I look at a guy like Michael Bay or like a Zack Snyder, these guys feel like they're like just hired guns that do what the studios say. Like if a tour theory, you know, there's holes in a tour theory anyways, but yeah, there are definitely no tours today. Like
yeah.
Give them a bunch of money, make a Superman movie. Give them a bunch of money, make a Star Trek movie, make all these big ass franchises that will either flop. I mean, most of the stuff that's come out in the last like 5 years doesn't really perform to people's expectations. And what next?
I mean, well, it's weird because capitalism, I thought, was supposed to allow for individualist creative expression, but everything seems so streamlined now. It's almost like, maybe it doesn't do what we think it does.
The thing is, I think that a lot of the more auteurish figures, I guess, are you know, I mean, they're making their movies online, they're kind of financing it themselves, but then it comes to distribution, it's like if you want it distributed, like kind of have to make a deal with some company somewhere, whether that's a streaming service or something else. Mm-hmm. And you know, they're willing to give so much creative freedom that it ruins an artist. Like
mm-hmm.
like because everything all of a sudden for them is like, you know, I mean, they send notes back and stuff, but they're like, oh, don't worry, you can do anything you want. And it's like, you know, it's
behind the scenes, there's studio interference.
Yeah. And also just it's too big, like they hand budgets that are like this huge budget, and then the person's just kind of like like I was reading about Vulture did a thing on Ryan Murphy, the American Horror Stories guy, and his Netflix deal, and like how that's ruined his fucking creativity, because it's like he just has so like he's just like, oh, I'll do this, and it's all like just trash at this point.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious, did you guys get a chance to talk about? So John Frankenheimer, the director of the Manchurian Candidate, he got to follow this up with a little movie called 7 Days in May. Did you guys get to mention that before? Or?
No, I haven't seen that.
Okay, well, you're going to have to do a movie night on that, because that's actually extremely subversive for a movie that came out in 1974, that Frankenheimer actually did the movie at the request of Kennedy when John F. Kennedy was president. And it's a movie slightly influenced by the Wall Street push, or the Wall Street plot that Smedley Butler exposed. But it's about a group of right-wing generals in the Pentagon that plan to overthrow the president. And it's like, it's very, very subversive for a movie that came out in 1964. And in a way, it's much more upfront about the dislike of, you know, right-wing sort of McCarthyite politics in that era than even the Manchurian Candidate could be.
Yeah, well, and Kennedy kind of represented a break from that, like a break from that style of politics, like a break from, because I was talking about this with people on Twitter like a couple days ago. Like I've been reading a lot of Stephen Kinzer, and there's like, Kennedy kind of understood more than any other president really at the time that like he understood that nationalism, like democratic nationalism, does not equal communism whatsoever. Like democratic nationalism and like post-colonial, like I don't know, like liberation movements are something that could be easily like driven to the US's side, like even if they're like kind of third worldist movements. So like there's, after relentlessly like pursuing Sukarno in Indonesia during Eisenhower, there was like a short 2-year break where they kind of we were still training people at Fort Leavenworth, obviously, but like we kind of let Sukarno back into the national or the global stage because Kennedy was like, he's going to go to the Soviet Union. Like I understand, like he's not going to go to the Soviet Union if he has like Americans as an ally, but like he is like if you're just like, yo, fuck this guy, he's going to start getting weapons from fucking.
I'm assuming you guys have read the Jakarta Method.
Yeah,
I have it right here.
One of the most interesting aspects of that book, and one of the points that Vincent Bevins is making in that I think sometimes people miss, the real victims of the Cold War in a lot of ways were the non-aligned movement.
Mm-hmm.
It was the third world that got stuck between the two sides, and they suffered the most out of all in that conflict.
And Kinzer makes that point pretty frequently too, during that time period, because first of all, Eisenhower had Allen Dulles and John Foster Dulles as the two, like like the overt and covert like hand holding of the state, and they had no interest whatsoever in like a non-aligned movement. Like to them, like especially to John Foster Dulles, like if you weren't like aligned with America, you were a communist. Like there's no middle ground. There was no like understanding that like a third worldist movement might want liberation, because he didn't even view like African, Asian, like he didn't view them as like Latin American, like as people really to start with. Well,
the Dulles brothers had like it's like they have a very black and white, like good versus evil sort of. I mean, they were very, influenced by Christian theology in its American form.
When it came to Hitler, but
well, that's true.
But no, and that kind of is what got us into the Cold War situation that we were in, and then. I mean, under Kennedy, like Kennedy kind of understood. Kennedy really did, like he ran on being more of a sympathetic Cold Warrior, but sympathetic to liberation movements in these different countries.
Yeah, I think the best way to put it is like a slightly less insane version of a Cold Warrior.
Yeah. Or no, just, I mean, maybe just a Cold Warrior that also understands that the interests aren't black and white. Like, so like, it's nuanced. But it's not like he was stopping, because he was obsessed with fucking killing Castro. Like he thought about killing Castro nonstop every day of the fucking week because he was so embarrassed by the fucking Bay of Pigs, like within like a year of taking office. So like,
no.
Yeah,
that's definitely true. I guess I'm just saying that like I think there are even elements further to the right of Kennedy that, like, by comparison, like they make Kennedy look completely sane. In terms of foreign policy. I mean, you look at like a General Edwin Walker or a Curtis LeMay, like they're pretty extreme figures in their thinking about the Cold War.
Yeah. And then you have like LBJ, who is kind of just disinterested. Like, the Vietnam War is really his one foreign policy obsession. And like, if
trying to end the war and get out safely.
He ends up greenlighting the massacres in Indonesia because he's upset that Sukarno, not that Sukarno is allying with the fucking Soviet Union. He's just disinterested in the entire thing and realized that Sukarno isn't going to be his like Vietnam ally. So like, finally Allen Dulles gets like, and his acolytes get to do it and like, just help fucking like destroy Indonesia, because LBJ is just like, well, I have no use for him and I don't really care. Like,
right.
And Vincent Bevins makes that point. I was working on a documentary that didn't end up getting finished, and I hope one day it does. But I was working on a Jakarta Method documentary because he gave a talk at Jacobin, and so I was like cutting that down, and that's what got me interested in Stephen Kinzer, because I was trying to find footage of the Dulles brothers for that documentary, And I like couldn't find them anywhere. And then I finally like found that Stephen Kinzer book. But
Kinzer, by the way, is like one of the best out there. I could read everything he's written, and just he is like top notch. I was so happy I had him on Parallax Views a month or so ago, and he ended the show in the funniest way possible. I was like, well, what do you think average Americans can do? And he just says, torment your congressman. Just keep calling and writing into him. It's like, I'm not sure that'll work, but I like the torment your congressman part.
See, now I'm going to have to actually find Kinzer, find his books, because now you guys are just being good influences on me about it.
Yo, do you think
now you got me interested?
Do you think you could try to convince him to come on a stream with all of us and like break down
we should try to figure out a way to do that.
Yeah,
maybe.
I like the idea of doing this like around film, because like I feel like every fucking leftist podcast is just kind of doing like, here's what's in the news. So the idea of like doing this not just based around politics, but based around film and kind of like that,
like pop culture kind of thing.
Yeah, like viewing it through that lens makes it a lot more interesting.
In regards to the film portion of this discussion, why do you guys think that all these years later, the Manchurian Candidate has such... I mean, it's still really resonant and a really well-loved film, and so many films have ripped it off. While I was rewatching the movie
it's
before we got on here.
Once.
That's true. That's true. But even if you go back to the 70s, there were movies like Telephone with Charles Bronson and Donald Pleasance. It's a complete ripoff of the Manchurian Candidate. I mean, this sort of plot line was recycled over and over during the Cold War, and it's still recycled now.
We watched this earlier, but we can watch it again. I have a Stephen Kinzer talking about this. He gave a lecture where he literally talked about this subject. So here, let me try to pull this up really fast. But yeah, like the fact that in the 70s, the Manchurian Candidate, the Manchurian Candidate genre, I guess, of film kind of takes off in this really obsessive way.
Their minds must have been fertilized. They were open to this crazy idea. Why? I think it was because of fiction, because of the stories and the movies and the books these people absorbed as they were growing up. There were Allan Poe stories, Sherlock Holmes stories, Gaslight, movies about Svengali. People go out and kill because an evil psychiatrist has hypnotized them. And I think these guys, consciously or unconsciously, internalized this fantasy and concluded that what fiction writers could imagine, science could make real. The interesting footnote to this is that as after MK Ultra became known to the public beginning in the 1970s, it spawned a whole new genre of fiction. Books, novels, movies like Spotless Mind, Born Identity, Men in Black, all of these have mind control or mind washing as a theme. So a CIA project that was nurtured by fiction ultimately wound up nurturing a whole new subgenre of fiction itself. Regarding the Manchurian Candidate, it's really a very interesting story. First of all, I think the description that you gave is amazingly accurate. It's true. The only ones who really believed this stuff was possible were the people inside. They consulted other people, like, for example, at the Menninger Clinic. They consulted the Menninger brothers, leading psychologists who ran this famous psychoanalytic institute, and they both told them, this is nonsense. You're barking up a crazy tree. This is never going to result in anything. But since that wasn't the right answer, that was just filed away. And there were other people writing in places like Argosy and True Magazine who told them, yes, it was true. So they loved that stuff. One of these guys they actually hired as a consultant. So I just want to mention a little bit about the Manchurian Candidate, though, specifically. I found a very interesting memo that remarked about this, and I believe that the author of this actually commented on it during a Senate hearing. So the book of the Manchurian Candidate was the first time that masses of Americans were exposed to the idea of brainwashing. But it came out just at the time when inside the CIA, chemists were reaching the conclusion that mind control is a myth and there can never be any such thing as a Manchurian Candidate. So this guy this chemist actually says that movie caused us, or that book and movie caused us a lot of problems, because just as we discovered that something couldn't happen, the whole world began to believe that it could.
Yeah, so I don't know.
I just want to say I'm impressed. I mean, that dude knows his movies. I mean, he just mentioned 1944's Gaslight. That's a deep cut.
I wanna watch that for a stream now that like I've been reading the MK Ultra book he did, because he talks about that a lot in it, and I feel like it could be a cool follow-up stream. But I didn't know that. I didn't even know the term gaslight was like that old, to be honest.
Yeah, it came from that.
Sorry,
yeah.
I had to step away for a moment, get a refill.
So
what I miss? Yeah, what I miss.
No, just watch the end of the Kinzer clip. So I think it's. I mean, one big reason I think in the 70s that this genre kind of comes out swinging is the church committee, and it's kind of the first time we're really finding out that like a lot of this stuff even happened. And you know, I mean, and that's along with, you know, Watergate and the role that the fucking CIA played in Watergate, and like, you know, like so all of this stuff kind of happens in rapid fire, and I feel like suddenly people are like, can you imagine like what the CIA has been doing this whole time? And these movies kind of come out based on that, like movie after movie after movie about like, you know, mind control, or like about, you know, just countercultural fucking like anti-government like propaganda kind of, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, just all of these ideas kind of are happening then, because like people kind of for the first time are realizing how dark or how far we had really gone, I guess, to try to win the Cold War. And at the tail end of the Cold War, I mean, you know, it petered on for another decade, but like at a time when like we're kind of moving our focus from Russia to like Latin America and places like in like, you know, like and things seem to be dying down. It seems like a perfect moment to like look back on it and say like, you know, did we really have to do all this stuff? So like the spy thing, the spy narrative, I think takes off from there. I don't know.
Yeah, you know, Men in Black, the whole neuralizer thing.
Yeah, I didn't even think of that being a connection, but that's definitely the whole memory forgetter thing they have. Yeah,
flashy thing, and the aliens too.
So I think that I think that there's probably a couple of directions that we can take this. I don't.
Well, I was also thinking of AI, you know, artificial intelligence in a way that kind of ties in with the what Kinzer was talking about, as far as like this boy that's a robot who thinks he's real but he's not, and God, I got to go back and watch that movie because it's been a while since I've seen it, but also it's just one of my favorite Spielberg movies. So, what's your guys' take on that as far as Kinzer, and how would you think Kinzer would put something like AI?
I mean, I don't think that he would necessarily have a take right now on AI. He's kind of more talking about like the intelligence state, which definitely, I mean, we can see uses that kind of software, but I don't think is necessarily fully tied in with the foreign policy aspect of it yet. I'd be interested to hear what Kinzer thinks of like drones. Like as that kind of warfare, because the book that I like, one of the last ones that I read, Overthrow, kind of stops at the Iraq War.
The thing that gets me is just how much this sort of like Red Scare paranoia is still with us. I mean, I get it that, you know, people got pulled into Russiagate and whatnot, but like even I saw that there was a New York Times op-ed. I think it was on June 25th, Chris Carter, X-Files creator, wrote a whole piece about like, well, conspiracy theories are BS, and, you know, there's not going to be any revelations about UFOs, which I think he's right about that. I don't think we're going to have any revelations about unidentified aerial phenomena. But then right in the middle of this little op-ed, he says, but, you know, there are some conspiracies that are true. Like, you know, definitely the Russians and the Cubans are hitting our embassies with microwave radio weapon technology. And I'm like, how is this any different?
Microwave radiology.
That one was spread in 2020. Like as the election was heating up, there was an article that came out that was like these like ex-intelligence people. Which why the fuck would you trust them? But like I think it was in the Daily Beast, and the Daily Beast just like loves to just report like because they're like kind of I like to call them like the vanguard of establishment media. You know what I mean? Like they're kind of like they're kind of the farthest you can get to trash, I think, within the establishment media.
Well, the thing is, people like Carter and like the Daily Beast are saying, well, conspiracy theories are crap unless they're conspiracy theories about evil foreign governments.
Yeah.
Like,
so they had a thing where these ex-intelligence, like this ex-intelligence guy came back and claimed that like he thinks that the Russians had hit him with like a microwave ray or something, and like it was just uncritically reported by the Daily Beast. They're like, did you hear about what happened to this guy? And it was like clearly at a time where the Democratic Party was trying to prove that they were tougher on Russia and China than Trump was. And so like this Russiagate moment, it kind of seemed like it died down for a second, started back up again, and that was like one of the more ridiculous ones.
I mean, for me, it's like a Cui Bono thing. Like, what exactly does Cuba have to gain from this? I mean, it kind of sucks for Cuba because, we were starting to normalize relations, and then Trump screwed all that up, and now they're being accused of microwave weapons targeted at,
And Biden shows no interest in like the two foreign policy things. The two foreign policy, I think, accomplishments of the Obama administration that were positive. Like lists and lists of ones that were negative. And the two that were positive was normalizing relations with Cuba, or starting to, like thawing that out, starting to end the blockade. And the
JCPOA, right?
Yeah. And Biden shows no interest in salvaging either of those accomplishments, which are big accomplishments, I think.
Yeah.
And his entire State Department is taken out of the Obama State Department, and they seem to not want to salvage their accomplishments either.
Right. It's like they're trying to whitewash their own history, to put it bluntly.
Yeah. Or appear tough enough that they're willing to get rid of all positive developments and
I think a lot of it is driven by this, I'm Joe Biden. I have to unify the country. And, we have to listen to what the Republicans are saying. It's like, no, that always just ends with you getting pushed even further to the right than you already are.
But, yeah.
Right. Yeah.
There's also moments where he pushed Reagan and Bush to the right.
That's true.
It was fucking terrifying, but also hilarious. Like, and he just tried doing it again. Wait, I'll find the clip of it. The Biden administration is once again doing the exact same thing that Biden did in the 90s with the crime bill. I found this the other day. I got to go back a while ago. But Jen Psaki basically whitewashed Biden's long criminal record Biden's long criminal justice record by saying I don't think that hold on, let me see if it's this one. Because she said it in a very fucking terrifying kind of way, to be honest.
And I will note that while the president ran on and won the most votes of any candidate in history in a platform of boosting funding for law enforcement, after Republicans spent decades trying to cut the COPS program, which again is public record. We don't need to undervalue the intelligence of the American people.
And the sad part is that we have no more police in the streets of our major cities than we had 10 years ago. And what the president proposes won't help much. What he proposes is no increase over what the Congress has already approved last year. In a nutshell, the president's plan doesn't include enough police officers to catch the violent thugs, not enough prosecutors to convict them, not enough judges to sentence them, and not enough prison cells to put them away for a long time.
So notwithstanding the fact some of the old Democrats and former presidents who were Democrats before Carter, I suspect. I don't know who we're talking about here. But in the old days, it is true. When Richard Nixon was running for president, Richard Nixon used to talk about law and order, and the Democratic response was law and order with justice, whatever either one of those meant. I never knew. I was running then in 1972. I didn't think Richard Nixon knew what it meant, and I didn't think the opposition knew what it meant. Crime is not Democrat or Republican. Making the streets safe is not a Democratic or Republican issue. This is one of those issues I hope this passage of this bill will be taken out of the gridlock category and moved into an emerging consensus. And the consensus is as follows, and I will cease when I finish this statement. The consensus is A, we must take back the streets.
I always love. They're so obsessed with consensus. They're just like we have to have the consensus.
Wow.
This isn't about partisan politics.
Just wow.
But it's the same. It's the same. I mean, because everybody tried to act like in 2020, like Biden had evolved on criminal justice, and then Jen Psaki stands up and goes, "Well, Republicans have been trying to cut funding for decades." All right, so when was Biden making that point? When he was pushing the crime bill, when he was pushing fucking mandatory sentencing, when he was pushing Bush and Reagan to the right on policing, like that's when Biden was making those points, and it's the exact same point now that there's like a crime wave that they're willing to jump back on. So it's fucking terrifying, honestly, because it's just gonna end up with more. It's gonna end up with more fucking heartbreak and more fucking death and more like incarcerated people when we're kind of decarcerating people slowly. Like it's gonna be a huge step back.
Well, Biden did say nothing will fundamentally change. So,
but yeah.
What can we expect?
Any closing thoughts on Manchurian Candidate?
I do have a closing thing here. So, rewatching it before we went on air, I don't think I have popped that hard for an ending in a long time. I was like, when he just like drills those shots into his stepdad and his mom, I was like, yes, take him down. No, it's a very like cathartic ending because Lansbury plays the villain like to a hilt. Like you just really grow to like hate her in this movie. I mean, just on a purely, entertainment level, it's a very well done film.
Yeah.
And she's a fucking like a nihilist before the Big Lebowski. Like we believe in the version of fucking nihilist. Like it's and because like the thing is that the interesting thing I think is that her version of like her government wouldn't have ended up with communism. Like it would have ended up with totalitarian fascism. Like she's doing anything she can to take over, to take power. Like she believes in absolutely nothing besides power. Her husband, she's just plying with fucking alcohol. He's brainwashed in a different way. Like he's just like he's been fucking plied with alcohol to the point where his brain just like doesn't work, and he's like
you have to love how it's clearly saying Joseph McCarthy is just a drunken buffoon. That is what the movie is saying.
Yeah.
But then it's also not saying like, oh well, it's saying that the Soviet Union and China are kind of buffoons too, or seem that way. You know what I mean? Like they're being played Machiavellian style by Angela Lansbury, and throughout the movie, like I think that I love the fucking the Chinese scientists and like all of those characters, but like they're not looked at in. It's not even like they're kind of buffoonish themselves. Like they're cracking jokes and like or like overly serious. Like you don't get the feeling that like these are evil people that are going to be able to wrest power away from Angela Lansbury, because in this movie she's completely fucking evil. Like there's no redeeming quality about her.
That's what makes her a badass in this movie.
The other thing I was gonna say too, there's a lot of.
There's one thing I wanted to bring up really fast. I keep forgetting to bring this up, and I wanted to the whole time. I love that the institute that they work for is the Pavlov Institute.
Right.
That's the institute that conditions their brain. I don't know. I just thought that was a great.
That's a great touch for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, it's I think Lansbury is very good in it, but there's a lot of familiar faces in this film if you're like really deep into cinema. When I was watching it, I was like, I stopped at one point. There's a Russian agent in it named Dmitri. And I'm like, wait, that's Reggie Nowder. That's the guy from Salem's Lot. That's the vampire from Salem's Lot. And Henry Silva as the sort of buffoonish, what is it? He's the cook for Lawrence Harvey. He's playing an Asian guy, but he's, the whitest thing since white bread. I mean, everyone sort of is given their time to shine in this, even if it's only for like a cameo. And there's a lot of really good and talented actors and actresses in it. Yeah. And I mean, Janet Leigh is always very easy on my eyes. So,
yeah. Well, I think that, one of the cool things about like older Hollywood is that there was just like a stable of character actors and that were very, very good, that spent decades. They'd kind of enter in these contracts with different studios, just be in like all of these different assorted movies and be in pretty much every other movie. Like in noir movies, there's that one that guy Elijah. He's not in this, but there's this like if you watch like a bunch of noir movies from like the
Elijah Cook.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You watch a bunch of like noir movies from the 40s and 50s, the same actors pop up over and over again.
Yeah.
And I feel like this is kind of like the dawn of new Hollywood. Like you're watching, like it's the same kind of thing.
People were getting jobs back then. They were getting jobs like crazy.
It's also funny that it's also interesting that somehow it's like the one movie that's not a Frank Sinatra vehicle that he was in.
Where like he's singing every scene.
Yeah, like no, like it seems like a lot of the movies that Frank Sinatra was in were obviously scripted for him.
Yeah.
And in this case, they like gave him the turn to be a hero, but like none of that dialogue is remotely written for him.
Yeah.
I mean, you can hear him saying "kid" or whatever, but like that's
that's just part of his New Jersey upbringing.
The other thing that works about the film for me is, I mean, if you were to go into it blind, I think you wouldn't know who's on whose side. I mean, even the Janet Leigh character, her interactions.
Yeah, I thought she was going to end up being like the American operator.
I thought because like the way she interacts with Marco, the Frank Sinatra character, you're like, oh, what's her motivations? Like, what, she just left her fiance? What is this woman doing? Like,
and it's a movie that's drenched in paranoia, obviously, which I love when movies are drenched in paranoia personally. But like it's funny when like you really realize that somebody is just like a one-dimensional character meant to like move the plot along. Like there's no other redeeming like or whatever like factor to their dialogue, and you're like, I don't trust that person, and it's like, no, wait, that's a plot device.
In terms of paranoid thrillers and just movies that are drenched in paranoia, where would you rank The Manchurian Candidate? Because for me, like, I think it's my bias towards films made after 1967, but I sort of prefer stuff like John Carpenter's The Thing. I think that's an extremely paranoid movie. Like I said, the Parallax View is the top one for me. Maybe Coppola's The Conversation, but I think The Manchurian Candidate has that, but I'm put off by how much it's drenched in this sort of the commies are coming paranoia.
Before I give my rating, also include David Cronenberg's The Fly.
Yes.
Oh my God, that movie! I mean, I saw that movie like 3 years ago, and I kid you not, guys, I had nightmares for like, I was sleeping with a nightlight on, with the light on for months because I would see that movie and I'm just like, oh God.
Well, the ultimate,
it would freak me out.
The ultimate paranoid Cronenberg for me is Videodrome. And that is Cold War-ish in its own way, but I don't know. I think this is a paranoid movie, but it's paranoid in this way where I'm like, oh God, it's like, it's not exactly like one of those, John Wayne movies, like Big Jim McClane, where it's like, oh, the commies are infiltrating. It's sort of kind of more liberal than that. And then it's saying, oh, really, the commies aren't the real threat. It's this, nation fascist woman in Angela Lansbury. But I still feel like I'm put off by some of the Cold War politics and whatnot.
It kind of feels like it's at a crossroads for me.
Yeah.
I think there's a perfect kind of synthesis where we're talking about all these movies that are like anti-government, like, oh, the real, like, be paranoid about your own government. And then like on one side, and then on the other one, it's like, be paranoid about the Russians. This somehow perfectly meets in that middle ground where it's like both your government and the Russians and the Chinese and, some lady that's on a train. And like, who do you know? Like, how do you know who to trust? And even the people that have good motivations, like, they're fucking brainwashed. So it's like, how do you know who to trust whatsoever? And I like the Raymond Shaw character a lot, because it's not like you're rooting for him in the sense of like, you're rooting for him to like overcome his mother and his stepfather, but he's not like a likable character. You're not like, oh, this is like a nice guy. Like, I feel like this guy is charismatic, and I'm like, and somehow like, he's just like this thing that's been like transformed by having this relationship with his mother, like almost in like a Norman Bates kind of way. Like,
I mean, the Oedipal complex thing is very much like up front in this movie. I'm not sure it's even subtext.
Yeah. I don't know. I think that, but I also think that throughout history, there's been a lot of these stories of like the powerful. I mean, besides like Oedipus, like the evil like totalitarian mother, and then just like the almost like I guess the like literally in the book actually, but like the impotent like father person like by her side. Literally in the book, he is impotent. Like in the Manchurian Candidate book, he can't have sex with her because she's like so dominated him that his like dick no longer works. So it's like this infinite. Literally, that's a detail that they go into at one point in the Manchurian Candidate like novel.
What do you guys think about the film in terms of? Are you guys fans of John Frankenheimer more generally? Because I think he's one of the more people don't talk about him as like one of these Hollywood directors on the same level as like a Spielberg. But I mean, he has some real gems. I mean, I won't say that this is a gem, but he did Island of Dr. Moreau, which was terrible. But he's done a lot of really great movies, and I'm trying to think of them off the top of my head. But he did Birdman of Alcatraz, and I
would have to kind of dig deep into his catalog to just check out a bunch of his movies to see which ones I would like, and ones that would be like, that was okay.
One that I haven't watched that I want to watch. And do a stream on. It would be interesting at some point to do the George Wallace. Two-part.
Taxi Driver. Is that one it?
No, I'm talking about John Frankenheimer has a George Wallace. Like that's his. That's the name of it. It's based on that Southern governor that was like the racist.
Right. Well, where I was going was, with the whole Arthur Bremer thing, influenced by John Hinckley, I was influenced by Robert De Niro's Taxi Driver, so that's where I was going. But yeah, that was
talking about Frankenheimer has a movie that's just called, or like a TV like two-part movie that's just called George Wallace, and I'd be very interested to watch that.
He also did a TV movie called The Path to War, which is it's like an anti-Iraq war film. So I mean, he's done some interesting things. French Connection 2, which I mean, it's not the French Connection, but it's good in its own right as a standalone. Also, he did an Israeli propaganda film called Black Sunday, which is really weird because he said, I tweaked a few things because I didn't want it to be purely an Israeli propaganda film. I wanted the Arabs to not look as bad.
And
but he's a very odd director.
Yeah, he is. He filmed Bobby Kennedy when he was running for president in '68. When he was on the road, he would film different shots of him, like greeting people, shaking hands. You can find this stuff. I think I was actually looking him up before JG came on during the break, and I think he died in 2007. Because he's not alive anymore, obviously.
This is 2002.
2002. Okay, I was off by.
Right, yeah. I there's a couple movies in here that I want to rewatch, like Birdman of Alcatraz.
Speaking of which, he sort of did a film that may be of interest to leftists just because of the content. It's 1991's Year of the Gun with the beautiful Sharon Stone. I'm a huge Sharon Stone fan, and I'm proud to admit that. I don't care, but
there's no problem with that.
I can't see her without thinking about Casino.
Casino is great, especially the TV edited version where it's like they have to censor every other word.
That's the first movie I did with Ben. Like the first movie stream I did with Ben on GTA. I think back in December because he had done Goodfellas with Mike Racine. Like they had talked about it, so we were like, we can't start with that. Like our movie stream started as like a Scorsese watch through, and then it just kind of transformed into
kind of evolved.
This multi-headed Hydra.
The reason I mention this Sharon Stone movie that he did, Year of the Gun, it deals with the kidnapping and assassination of Aldo Moro. It deals with the Red Brigades and all that stuff. So he's done a lot of oddly political films. So,
JG, this is a sort of thing that I do since you're a big film buff. I'm curious to know, what's your take on Kevin Smith? He of course has got the smile. He knows where I'm going.
Yeah, I'm honestly not the biggest Kevin Smith fan. I never got into Clerks. I get why it appeals to people. I
think both of us really, really love Clerks. It It reminds me of the town that I fucking grew up in, and it or the town that I live in, like New Paltz, kind of has a lot of fucking like weird fucking Jay and Silent Bob type people that hang out.
I know, right?
There's nothing to fucking do. So that movie really, I don't know. I
love it to death.
I liked what he did with the horror movies he's done lately, like Tusk and
Tusk and Red State and
Red State is really good. Red State actually surprised me.
He did Yoga Hosers, which is a sequel to Tusk.
I like, it's funny. Everyone I know hates Yoga Hosers, but I enjoyed Yoga Hosers. I thought it was like it reminded me of like those old Full Moon Studios type, low budget trash movies like the Puppet Master series.
Right,
and I was like,
it's great. Indie movies.
Red State, not to interrupt you, but Red State surprised me because I thought it was going to be, because I had a friend who was like real pure mainstream Democrat that loved Kevin Smith, and he was like all pumped for Red State, and I was like, oh God, is this going to be like a really preachy film? And I guess it is in some ways, but it's interesting. I mean, it plays a lot off of stuff like Waco, and it doesn't necessarily take the view that the federal government has the right approach to those things. It's sort of critical of the federal government in that way. And I actually like that he took that sort of viewpoint because it wasn't as black and white of a movie as I thought it was going to be.
Well, yeah, back to Yoga Hosers. Yeah, I don't understand why people hate that movie. I watched it several times on YouTube for free, and I got to say I love it. It's probably one of my favorite films of his outside of the Views universe, next to Jersey Girl.
I think Tusk is fucking great.
No, Tusk is
yeah, it is, but I kind of
maybe the nauseous. Like it gave me like this feeling of just like persistent nausea, and that's how I know that it was like a good I don't know, like gross out fucking like film. That genre of horror.
Well, I like that he's like Tarantino in a lot of ways because he'll bring back these actors that everyone forgot about. It's like Michael Parks is really good in Tusk, and he's also really good in Red State. I mean, you really hate him in Red State. He's such a bigoted, he's basically David Koresh in that movie, right? But that's the thing I like about Kevin Smith. He'll sort of bring in these actors that I grew up on, character actors that I would go to my video store. It was a video store that specialized in like genre films that were really obscure and whatnot. So those are the like kind of actors I like seeing. And he's sort of like, he's a career revival guy. He tries to, give an older guy or older actors and actresses, something to do. Yeah.
Well, it's the same genre of, or that same, I guess, style of as Tarantino of like filmmakers who clearly have watched way too much cinema.
Yeah.
Like filmmakers who like pop culture references is their is a big part of their aesthetic. So it's like, I mean with Kevin Smith it's obviously more comic books a lot of times, but then also definitely. Like action films, older films. So it's like that's interesting. It
gets really weird when you reach that level of cinephilia where you're watching like I will watch John Carpenter movies sometimes because I'm a huge John Carpenter buff, and I'll be like, oh, he's referencing this old Howard Hawks movie, and I would just think to myself, damn, I am such a nerd. How do I know that? But the other thing about Kevin Smith I was going to say is I don't know. I find some of his takes like kind of off base, but he makes good films. It's just not necessarily always my style of film.
Right.
Like I think his take on Tim Burton's Batman sucked though. I don't know if you guys remember that where he was I don't know.
There's an unreleased. Sorry to interrupt you, JG, but there's an unreleased script for There was going to be a Superman movie that Kevin Smith had written that Tim Burton was going to direct, and it never got made. And there's a documentary called "The Death of Superman Lives: What Happened," basically chronicling the early parts of the movie and how it all fell apart. I've seen it like several times. It's really good.
That was the one they were going to do with Nicolas Cage, right?
Yeah.
I've seen it. Yeah, I've seen the documentary. It is really good. I forget what he said about the Tim Burton Batman. I think Tim Burton said something about Planet of the Apes and how he would never read comic books, especially ones written by Kevin Smith. And then I think Kevin Smith said, "Well, that explains Batman. You've never read comics." I'm like, "No, you don't touch Tim Burton's Batman."
Well, yeah, I'm actually a big Tim Burton fan myself as well, so I respect both those guys.
I can't find the article on it, but I think Kevin Smith at one point was going to revive Preacher before the AMC show.
Yeah,
he was like slated to like help write and direct that.
You should actually, real quickly, Forrest, you should YouTube Kevin Smith and Tim Burton, because it's a funny clip that he does. He speaks at universities, and he's like, he's talking to an executive on the phone, and he's like, "I'm contemplating legal action." He's like joking around, and he's like going, "Hee." And then like the next day, he gets a response from Tim Burton's publicist, which I kid you not, this is his name, Bumble Ward. There's somebody on this planet named fucking Bumble Ward, and it's like, the gloves are off, and I will never read a comic book by Kevin. Here it is.
Enjoy Batman, just since the same people were.
Did I enjoy Batman? Yeah, I enjoyed Batman. I mean, with all its flaws and shit. Yeah, absolutely. When the movie came out, like I had no idea I ever wanted to be in film. I was just a guy that watched movies and shit. And that summer was huge. You couldn't turn around without seeing the bat signal somewhere. People would cut it into their fucking heads. It was just like, it was a summer of Batman. If you were a comic book fan, it was pretty hot. And I was real deep into it at that point. I had just gotten back into comics, so suddenly Batman was everywhere. So I was a big fan. But Tim Burton, I guess, like, ever since the Superman incident, people will bring me copies of the script. Like, they buy at comic book conventions or buy off the internet, and they hand it to me and they're like, "Would you autograph?" I say, "All right." And I always write, "Fuck Tim Burton." Because I figure he'll never see it. But I guess Tim Burton finally saw one. Because during the summer, right before Jay and Bob came out and after Planet of the Apes came out, there was a piece that ran in the New York Post on page 6 in which Tim Burton chewed me a new asshole. At the end of Planet of the Apes movie, I hope I'm not spoiling it for anybody, like, Marky Mark goes back to fucking present day. It is fucking Marky Mark. I don't care what he calls himself now. It was just like, feel it,
It's funny that he speaks in the same way that he writes monologues. Like when Ben Affleck gave those monologues in fucking Chasing Amy, pretty much like he had the same cadence that Kevin Smith has normally.
He's very interesting in that he sort of takes his show on the road and whatnot. I know Crispin Glover does that too, and he's very fan interactive. And I think he was joking about his little feud with Tim Burton, but it's kind of like I don't know. He's good at like drumming up attention by making witty remarks and whatnot, and I think he should be respected for that. Yeah. I mean, he's I hate to say respect the hustle, but he does have a pretty good hustle.
He does.
Not that I'm a fan of hustle culture, but
well, he got inspired by Slacker. That was So when he watched,
dude, we gotta watch that movie.
Yeah, a couple of years before. When I was in Austin like a couple of weeks ago, I went there for a vacation, and they had the dude from Slacker as like on a mural. That was the first thing I saw. But so he got inspired by that and like a indie cinema place that he went to, and that's kind of his original concept.
Like he was inspired by Spike Lee, Hal Hartley, Jim Jarmusch, and Richard Linklater.
Yeah, but like his exact idea, I guess his exact idea for Clerks was based on Slacker after seeing that.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of Linklater, at some point we're gonna have to do a show on a Scanner Darkly. That is a really weird paranoid film.
I did one with Ben and Jeremy Johnson. I mean, I'd be down to watch it again, but like a couple months ago, there's a stream that we did with Jeremy Johnson, who like I don't know. I guess he's really into Philip K. Dick or whatever, and like we watched that and like talked about it for like 2.5 hours, and it was a good stream. But I had to keep holding back from like making like I don't know. I was like, all right, don't make any fucking like drug jokes or whatever. Like, and then I just like ended up slipping up and like making like
you made a joke.
about like eating an edible. I was like talking about an edible or something, and then I was like, fuck.
I guess the top, I mean, Linklater movie for me, next to the Before trilogy, which is really good. I have to say, I mean, I like Boyhood. Hands down, one of my favorite movies of his. I bought it like 2 years ago, and I watched it in one sitting. And I was just like, damn, this is a real good movie. And I hadn't really been like familiar with Linklater until I got further into Kevin Smith. But yeah, we have to do Boyhood, even if you've already seen it more than once. Like it's still good.
I still love fucking Dazed and Confused. Like
hell yeah.
I'll never not like that movie. It's like
all right.
Yeah, it's literally, but it's literally like he kind of gives you like a feeling. He like gives you kind of like a feeling for like a nostalgic feeling for like an hour and a half, and it's like I don't know, like it's almost like the plot of it almost doesn't matter because there's just so much going on at the same time. That's a movie that has fucking so many like actors that ended up being big too, and
definitely. There's I should have brought it out, but I have a book in my personal library about the making of Dazed and Confused.
Really?
It also, yeah, I forget the author's name. It's like a interview book, and it came out like maybe a year ago during the pandemic.
You have to wonder kind of if if the reason that Kevin Smith reached out to fucking Ben Affleck for so many of those movies was Dazed and Confused.
Yeah.
As like the world's biggest fucking Richard Linklater fan, I feel like.
Do you guys think we have equivalents to those kind of filmmakers today? Like we've talked about Kevin Smith and we've talked about David Cronenberg and Frankenheimer.
Well,
I mean, I think there's a few guys that really impress me. Ty West, I'm a big fan of, but I don't think we have the same type of filmmakers anymore.
I think they get
I don't think so either. It's it's really hard to pin. That's a good question, but it's really hard to pinpoint because everything is just through a studio now. It's not really I mean, there still is do-it-yourself movie makers like Kevin Smith, but it's all corporated now. So
yeah, they get snatched up by streaming services.
Yeah.
And they write like TV shows rather than movies. And it kind of
that's the thing that like I'm not even necessarily saying that they have to be like indie filmmakers, but like filmmakers with like maybe their own sense of vision, or they're sort of thinking about what do I want to convey in this film, because I don't know. I feel like a lot of Hollywood films, Elaine Jones at Jackman writes about this a lot. A lot of them feel like kind of empty or, not, I don't know. Maybe I'm just too nostalgic for older movies.
I also feel like there's like a kind of a counter reaction to the fact that like it hit that moment with fucking like mumblecore, where like, indie movies were just having such a big moment, and like there were just so many like, weird ones, and then all of a sudden it feels like people kind of backed away from it because like how many of those movies can we really watch? And now
the other thing is
in a moment of like extreme consolidation with like streaming services. And
right. I mean,
sucks, but like
the changing dynamics, obviously, in technology with streaming services have rendered some so-called indie filmmakers irrelevant, as opposed to ones in the 80s and 90s. Since we're always like pinpointing that decade as like of course like opening my mind like in the 50s and like in the 70s with the New Hollywood, and you in the 80s you had like the artsy kind of films, and in the 90s of course the indie cred, and in the 2000s is kind of when it started getting a little corporated.
I mean, I think now you have like the paralyzing, like I think directors are fucking scared to do anything that isn't woke. Like, so I think we're at a very weird moment right now, and I think at some point it's all gonna bounce back.
Well, now what gets me now is like there's a Dallas-based company called Cinestate, which they own like publications like Fangoria, and they also make their own movies, but they're trying to do like the right-wing equivalent. Of like woke cinema. So it's like anti-woke.
And that ruins creativity, because at that point they're just being, because like if you look at truly subversive anti-PC like cinema or comic books or anything like Garth Ennis' stuff, like there's no like it's satire, and you don't think he's necessarily reacting to like, I mean, obviously like he's not reacting to like the Me Too movement. You know what I mean? He's not like, oh, like let's people are so woke nowadays. Like it's just satirical fucking grotesque madness, and none of these fucking right people are capable of thinking that like that way.
What's funny to me too, not to interrupt, was I feel like everyone talks like you hear Republicans talk about, oh, Hollywood, they're so left wing and whatnot, and I'm like, I don't know, Lexi Alexander, who, I mean, I've seen people criticize her as too woke, but she's pretty, far to the left compared to most Hollywood people these days. She did the Punisher Warzone. She's a Palestinian activist and all this other stuff, but she can't get a film made in Hollywood. And I'm pretty sure it may have to do with like her politics being sort of more to the left of the spectrum than what is acceptable in Hollywood.
Probably
I think
also
Hollywood's kind of conservative in some ways.
Yeah, the Palestinian activist part of it probably.
Yeah,
to think that
you should get her on the show at some point.
I want this show to blow up. Like I want to be able to like. I feel like very slowly we're gonna get to that point, but like I don't know. Like I need to get better at like reaching out to like guests that are big, and you know what I mean. Like being like, let's like why not? Like let's reach for the stars here.
Yeah, and I'll help. I will.
Yeah.
Like what was I gonna say? Shoot, it just it's my brain.
We should probably wrap the recording out because we did an hour first, and now this is going to be another 3 hour.
I'm sorry if I ranted too much. Went off topic.
No, this was fun. I feel like I can do this for 3 hours.
Since we talked about Reagan, if anyone is still listening at this point so far into the show, read the book Dark Victory. That is the best book on Reagan. Dan Moldea's Dark Victory, because it details how he was like all mobbed up. And how he was sort of a creation of Hollywood and the mob, but it's a fascinating book. So
that's not surprising. All right, quickly, everybody. So each person, I guess. What did you think of Manchurian Candidate, just on a good or bad kind of scale?
I guess I'll go first, since I'm the young one. I say probably about like an 8.5 out of 10.
I don't do.
Well, I'm not saying you have to rate it. I'm just saying.
Okay. I was gonna say I don't do like the 5 stars. I think it's an extremely well crafted film. I think John Frankenheimer is one of the more underrated 20th century directors of the Hollywood mold, and I think if you haven't seen it, there's a reason it's so highly regarded. I may not connect to it as much with regards to some of the Cold War politics, but it's an expertly made film with an astounding cast, including the supporting actors. And I think, for me, the big thing about the film is at about the hour mark, I think you start to feel this shift where it's like, oh, wait, maybe this is being more critical of McCarthyism than I realized.
Yeah.
And I think that twist halfway in really brought me into the film more than the first hour, and I was like, I started to get really into it after the hour mark, and I think it's a really great film.
You start to realize at that point, I think, that it's not like a black and white. Like the moral is not going to be black and white. Like it's going to be far more twisted, and like I don't know. Like I couldn't guess who the fucking who his American Operator was going to be. Like the first time I saw it, like I thought like it was maybe they were just going to throw in like another character or something. Like finding out that it was the mom, and it wasn't that the mom was like, twisting him. It was that literally the mom was twisting him, like wiped his brain, was kind of like
you have to love the way they reveal it too, right? Like he's just on the phone. He's like, it's the American Operator, Frank Sinatra. And Frank Sinatra's like, I wonder who it is. And he's just like, okay, mother. It's like Frank Sinatra. Oh
yeah, his face goes. I don't know. I respect the fuck out of the fact that it wasn't just a Sinatra vehicle. Like you know what I mean? Like I respect that they like used him as an actual, like he's
an actual actor.
And they allowed him to get overshadowed by Angela Lansbury. Like they allowed his character to kind of just fade into the background. Like everybody likes Frank Sinatra. Like I mean on like a charisma level. But then like I feel like he's the character that the character probably that is in it less than Frank Sinatra is Angela Lansbury, and she just like decimates decimates everybody else.
Since we didn't talk about it before I came on, and I don't think we mentioned it really here, what did you guys think of Lawrence Harvey as the tormented main character?
I mean, so I think that his accent kind of took me out of it at times, but I think he's kind of like because I was listening to the audiobook of it, and he's like just this awkward, unlikable, cloying figure. And as far as that goes, I think he did a great job of that. I think that, I don't know, I can't see anybody else really doing. And then kind of the fact that he had that accent made it even more stark that like everyone else is kind of just talking normally. And he's like, well, I don't. Like he has that like fucking weird voice, like especially when he gets like the brainwashing thing, like it almost sounds like he's part of like a machine or something. Like he's like, yes. Like
he sounds a little like Lurch from the app.
Yeah, I asked because people should look up his filmography. He's very interesting. He's sort of like a John Cassavetes character because he would do acting and then he was also a director. So very interesting guy on his own. But I thought he was good in it too. And I thought it was a great film overall.
All right. Well, we're going to cut it here. This is going to be going up on Tuesday.
Should we plug anything?
I'm going to have it. Oh, I need to plug that we have a Patreon now. So I think that this is going to go up on Tuesday. I think I'm going to put it up a little bit earlier for if people join the Patreon. I don't know if anyone has yet because I just made it today. But so yeah. So if you want to become a patron, it's patreon.com/movie night extra. And yeah, I don't know. We haven't gotten any patrons yet, but that's okay.
We're just starting, so we got time.
I'm really hoping to at least make enough money on Patreon that we can start kind of using it as a as a movie fund at the very least. Like,
yeah, so we wouldn't have to pay out of our own pockets.
Yeah, it's gonna get expensive. So if you like this show and if you want us to keep watching movies and not go broke, become a patron.
Yeah, definitely.
And let me consume content.
Give whatever you can.
Yeah, I mean, there's $5,
$1,
I'm gonna be
$10.
at some point. I'm gonna be doing like short form video essays. I think if people, I mean, if I can kind of make somewhat of a living on doing some of this stuff. So I think that there'll be a lot of content for people, and I think that at some points we'll also do we'll probably also do bonus episodes and stuff. So we're just getting started, and hopefully we get enough seed money to continue. But all right, I'm gonna leave it at that.
All right.
Thank you for coming on.
JG, thank you. Nice to meet you, man.
Appreciate it, and hope everyone can help you out on Patreon, and if they can help me out on Patreon, or if they can listen to Parallax Views, please do so.